The masters once said, "Peace is not a distant mountain. It's the ground beneath your next step. Every breath, every pause, every act of awareness is part of that path." Take a deep breath in. Let it reach the belly before slowly drifting out. Find a way to listen that feels natural. Maybe you lie down and feel the weight of the body, or you sit upright, spine tall and easy. Tonight's stories are footsteps along that gentle path. They won't demand effort. They will only remind you that stillness is always near, like the earth beneath your soles. If you'd like, share where you are listening from, or what emotion lingers within you tonight. Joy, fatigue, hope, or longing. Everything belongs here. Now let the breath guide you homeward, step by step. Our journey begins with the first story. It is said there was once a monk who lived alone in a crumbling hut on the edge of a forgotten village. His robes were patched, his alms bowl was cracked. His sandals made no sound on the stone path. He spoke little, taught no students, carried no scrolls. But people said strange things happened when they met him. A merchant who had been cruel to his workers walked by the hut and wept for no reason. A mother carrying grief for her lost child said the monk looked at her once, and the grief melted into the wind. When asked what he taught, the villagers would shrug and say, "He says only this: there is light, even in darkness." The hidden light. It is one of the most mysterious and profound teachings in Mahayana Buddhism, because it does not promise that suffering will end quickly. It does not say life will be easy. It says only, there is something in you, deeper than pain, stronger than shame, more real than your confusion. It is called Buddha nature, and it exists in all beings. Not just the gentle ones, not just the wise ones, but also in the angry man gripping the bar, in the prisoner lying in silence, in the girl who cuts herself and hides the blade, in the addict, in the abuser, in the one we condemn. The light does not go out. It can be buried, forgotten, covered in ash, but never extinguished. There's a story in the Mahayana scriptures. A group of disciples sat with the Buddha and asked, "Master, does everyone have Buddha nature?" And the Buddha said, "Even this dog has it." The disciples frowned. The dog scratched, barked, chased shadows. But the Buddha saw beyond behavior. He saw the seed, the stillness beneath the noise, the jewel in the dirt. Imagine a gold statue wrapped in rags, sealed in clay, buried for centuries. No one knows it's there, but if you chip away the layers, the gold shines. That is the self, not something to create, something to uncover. We live in a world that measures worth by action. We say, prove you're good, show you're worthy, earn your place. But the Dharma says, you are already whole. Now act in a way that honors that. There's another story. A monk once asked a teacher, if everyone has Buddha nature, why do they act with greed and hatred? The teacher pointed to a clear pool. He picked up a stick and stirred the mud at the bottom. The water turned cloudy. Is the clarity gone? The teacher asked. No, said the monk. It's just hidden. Exactly, the teacher replied. Wait long enough and it will return. The path, then, is not about becoming something new. It is about becoming familiar with what has always been true. About seeing through the layers. not pushing them away, but noticing. This fear is a layer. This craving is a layer. This story I tell myself that I am broken, unworthy, lost, is a layer. And underneath, stillness, light. You. Some people fear this teaching. They say, if everyone has Buddha nature, what about evil? But Mahayana Buddhism does not excuse harm. It reveals the tragedy behind it. It says, this one too was once innocent. This one too has a light they forgot. This one too is capable of awakening. Not as an excuse, but as a possibility. When you see others through this lens, something shifts. The one who hurt you still hurt you. But now, they are more than that. You don't forgive because they deserve it. You forgive because you see clearly, because you do not want your own light dimmed by hatred, because you too want to be free. Commentary. To believe in Buddha nature is not to be naive. It is to have the deepest possible faith in what cannot be destroyed. Even by trauma, even by war, even by your own worst mistake. It is the faith that says, there is gold under the clay, even if I've forgotten it, even if no one else sees it, even if I don't yet know how to reach it. The monk in the crumbling hut. He had nothing, but he saw the light in everyone. And so people came, not to learn doctrine, but to be seen, to be reminded, to be held in the quiet truth that nothing in them was beyond repair. Maybe that's your task today, not to fix yourself, but to pause, to breathe, to ask, what if there's still light here? And then, to live from that place. Even if no one else understands. Even if the robe still feels heavy. Because the moment you remember, you become the reminder. The sun hung low over the fields, casting long golden shadows across the dry earth. At the edge of a quiet village, 2 mango trees stood side by side. One was tall and strong, its branches heavy with fruit. Its golden mangoes glowed in the light, plump, sweet and fragrant. Children would stop and stare. Travelers paused to admire. Birds sang in its branches as if drawn to its beauty. The other tree was bare. Its bark was worn, its limbs crooked. It bore no fruit, and no one stopped beneath its shade. But this second tree, quiet, unnoticed, was the Buddha in one of his past lives. And this is the story of why he chose to remain fruitless, for the sake of something greater. Long ago, the land had been wild. The forest grew thick around a small monastery where a humble sage lived with his disciples. He taught them to observe closely, to see not just what was obvious, but what was true. One morning, while walking through the woods, the sage turned to his students and pointed at 2 saplings growing side by side. These trees, he said, were born at the same time, but they will live very different lives. The students blinked. They look the same, said one. The sage only smiled. Wait. And the years passed. The first tree grew fast. Its branches stretched wide. Its roots drank deep from the stream nearby. And when its first mangoes came, the villagers discovered them. Sweet as honey, smooth as silk. They came in crowds. Children climbed its limbs. Merchants took its fruit to sell in town. Goats rubbed their backs against its bark. Travelers broke its twigs for kindling. Even the birds, once gentle, began to peck at its flowers for their scent. And still, the tree gave, but over time it began to lean. A branch cracked under a child's foot. Its roots loosened from the trampling of cattle. The fruit became harder to grow, and some seasons it had none at all. Still, the people came. The second tree grew quietly. It bore no fruit. No children climbed it. No travelers plucked its leaves. Birds rested gently in its shade but never stayed long. The villagers ignored it. But its bark stayed smooth. Its roots grew deep. Its trunk remained upright and still. And it watched. One summer, the king of the region came to the forest on retreat. He set up camp near the fruiting tree. His cooks, servants, and soldiers lounged beneath its shade, praising its sweetness. Then one of the ministers said, "If this tree has served so well, why not cut it down? The wood would make fine furniture. The fruit is nearly gone, but its trunk could be carved into chairs for your throne room." The king, intrigued, gave the order. And the next day, the great fruiting mango tree was felled. Its branches snapped, its trunk cracked open. Its roots, noble and deep, were torn from the earth, and all the forest fell silent. Later that week, the king walked through the woods again and saw the second tree, bare, small, and unremarkable. "What of that one?" he asked. His minister shrugged. "No fruit, no use, not even shade. Let it be." And so, it was spared. The sage, watching from a distance with his disciples, bowed slightly to the bare tree. "Do you see?" he said. "Sometimes what survives is not what shines the brightest, but what draws the least desire." The disciples looked at him with puzzled eyes. "But Master, was the fruiting tree not noble? Was its generosity not good?" "Yes," the sage said gently. "It lived a life of service, and that is honorable." He looked toward the bare tree, but this one made a choice, a quiet choice. It saw what happened to its brother, and though it too could have borne fruit, it chose not to, for the sake of survival, for stillness, for watching without being consumed. Many lifetimes later, the Buddha would recount this story to his own monks. He would say, "There are times to serve and times to endure. There is merit in offering yourself to the world, and wisdom in stepping back, not from fear, but from foresight." And the story passed through generations, told to children not to make them afraid of giving, but to teach discernment, to remind them that not all service must be seen, that sometimes quiet restraint is a form of compassion too, because the world will always chase what glows, but sometimes what glows too brightly gets torn down, and what stands quietly survives to keep teaching. The sun shimmered over the canopy of an ancient forest, casting dappled light onto the wide, glistening river that snaked through its heart. The air was rich with the scent of ripe fruit and warm leaves. Birds called lazily from the branches, and deep in this green sanctuary, there lived a great band of monkeys, free, agile, unafraid. They were led by a king, not crowned with gold nor seated on a throne, but known by every heart in the jungle as a being of rare strength, deep wisdom, and boundless love. He was the Buddha in a past life, and his name was whispered with reverence among the trees, Mahakapi, the great monkey king. The troop followed him not out of fear, but from trust. He chose the ripest fruit for the weakest among them. He led them across rivers in flood. He taught the young how to leap and the old how to rest. And when predators stalked the forest floor, he stood between his people and the teeth of death. But even such noble creatures cannot stay hidden from the eyes of kings. Far downstream, where the river widened and palace walls gleamed under the sun, there lived a human king. He was wealthy, powerful, and restless. One morning, while drinking sweet water from a golden cup, he bit into a mango unlike any he had tasted. Its flesh was fragrant, smooth, almost glowing. He turned to his servants, astonished. "Where did this come from?" he demanded. A trembling servant bowed low. "From the northern forest, Your Majesty. It was carried by the river." The king stood. "Then that forest shall be mine." And so he rode, hundreds of soldiers at his back, their armor clinking like distant thunder. Across plains, over hills, and into the great northern woods they marched, until they reached the grove where the mango tree stood. Its branches curved wide, heavy with golden fruit. And high in its arms, the monkeys feasted. The king looked up, and his joy turned to fury. "They steal what is mine," he said. "Surround the tree. Not one escapes." His archers raised their bows. The monkeys screamed and scrambled. Some fell. Some clung to the bark, trembling. Mothers shielded their babies. The tree that had fed them now became a trap. And the monkey king, Mahakapi, watched from a distance. He saw the ring of soldiers, the drawn bows, the trembling hearts of his people, and he knew there was no way down. Unless he climbed a tall cliff beside the river. From there he could see the mango tree, the forest, the fear. He wrapped his legs around the trunk of a strong bamboo stalk, measured the distance, and leapt. Across the sky he soared, limbs outstretched, heart steady. He reached the tree, but not the ground. His body caught a branch, and he hung there, arms extended, back arched across the gulf between safety and slaughter. A living bridge. He turned his head and called out, "Go! Cross me, now!" One by one, the monkeys scrambled onto his back. They clutched his fur, their tiny hands trembling. Some hesitated, some wept, but they crossed, from danger to safety, over the back of the king who held and held and held, until the last one was gone. In the grove below, the human king had seen everything. He watched the great monkey fly, watched him cling, watched him bear the weight of an entire nation, and now he watched him fall. The monkey king's body gave out, muscles torn, spine twisted. He collapsed at the base of the tree, breath shallow, limbs crumpled like leaves after a storm. The human king approached, silent. This was not the enemy he imagined. This was not a beast. This was something else. He knelt. The monkey king opened his eyes. "You could have run," the human king whispered. "You could have saved yourself." The monkey breathed barely. But what would a king be without his people? Tears welled in the king's eyes. He had marched to conquer, to taste fruit, to claim land. But he had found something far richer: honor, selflessness, sacrifice. He turned to his soldiers. "Tend to him," he ordered. "Treat him with care." But it was too late. The monkey king's breath slowed, and then stopped. The human king built a shrine there, beneath the mango tree. Not for conquest, not for glory, but for a being who had shown him what true kingship meant. And from that day on, he ruled differently. Not with fear, but with wisdom. Not with pride, but with service. He remembered the curve of that body stretched across space, the silence in which it held, the lesson it gave. Centuries later, the story would be carved into stone, painted onto temple walls, and passed from one mouth to another like a sacred fruit. Children would ask, "Is it true? Did a monkey really give his life?" And the elders would smile. "Yes," they'd say, "and in doing so, he taught the world how to live." Because sacrifice is not weakness, it is strength in its purest form. And a leader is not the one who commands the most, but the one willing to give the most, even his life, for those who trust him, for the good of all. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. There was once a monastery nestled in the cliffs above a wide, mist-covered valley. Travelers came from all over the land, seeking wisdom from the old abbot who lived at its heart. But no one ever entered without first passing through the gate of questions. It was a tall wooden door, weathered by time, bound in iron, and it never seemed to open, no matter how many times pilgrims knocked. Instead, beside the gate stood a young monk with a calm face and a single instruction. "If you wish to pass, you must answer, 'What keeps you from entering?'" Some said, "My sins." Others said, "I'm not ready." One said, "I'm too angry." Another said, "I'm still seeking." To each answer, the monk bowed and said, "Return when you are not." And so the pilgrims would leave, some frustrated, some weeping, some silent. One day, a weathered traveler approached. She was older than most. Her robes were plain, her eyes clear. She stood before the gate and read the words carved above, "Liberation is here." Then she looked at the gate and realized there was no lock, no bolt, no bar, just a handle. She turned it. The door opened and she walked through. The monk beside the gate only smiled, because the lesson had never been in the answer, it had been in the assumption. This is the story of liberation, not as something earned, but as something already available, once illusion falls away. Commentary. Most of us believe the door is locked, that we must be perfect first, clean first, worthy first, empty of anger or sadness or self-doubt. But the Dharma does not wait for your perfection, it waits for your presence. The Buddha did not say, "You must transcend before you begin." He said, "See clearly," and in seeing, freedom unfolds. The gate of questions was never locked, but the mind said it was, because it clings to a self-image that believes, "I am not there yet. I am not enough. I am still broken." But brokenness too is part of the path, and sometimes it is the crack that lets the light through. Liberation is not far, it is not elsewhere. It is not earned. It is the moment you stop demanding anything of the moment and simply turn the handle. The traveler who opened the gate was not special. She had simply grown tired of pretending the barrier was real. She saw the door for what it was, just a door, and walked forward. The monks say the abbot greeted her without words, only a bow. Because no celebration is needed for one who sees the obvious. This story is often told to new students when they first enter training. Some smile, some frown, but a few immediately stand up and walk to the edge of the room to check if the door is locked. And when it opens easily, you can always hear the soft laughter of awakening. So if you find yourself waiting for permission, waiting for a sign, waiting to be good enough to begin, ask, what if the door was never locked? What if I only needed to reach for it? And if your hand trembles, that's all right. Just turn the handle. The Dharma is not waiting behind it. The Dharma is the act of reaching. At the corner of Maple and Fifth, there stood a little cafe that never advertised. No neon signs, no digital menus. Just a chalkboard easel that read, "Come in, breathe, sip slowly." Inside, the scent of cinnamon and ground espresso lingered like an old song. And behind the counter moved Raya. She didn't move quickly, not because she was lazy, but because every motion mattered. Scoop, steam, pour, wipe. A rhythm of care, repeated hundreds of times a day. Customers noticed. They came stressed, hurried, multitasking, but left quieter. Because somehow, even in the rush of morning lines, Raya made you feel like time had paused. She wore no uniform, only soft linen aprons and a tiny brass bell around her wrist. It didn't jingle constantly, just gently when she turned or wiped the counter or placed a mug just right. A small sound, but intentional. One day, a man asked her, "What's the bell for? Aesthetic?" Raya smiled. "It's a reminder," she said, "to return to the moment." The bell had come from a monastery in Korea, a gift from a traveling monk who had passed through one rainy morning, soaked to the bone, but smiling like the clouds had kissed him. He'd ordered chamomile tea, sat for an hour, said nothing, and when he left, he gave her the bell. "For your practice," he had whispered. At first, she didn't know what he meant. But over time, she came to understand. Every chime was a callback. Back to the steam rising from the milk. Back to the texture of ceramic under her fingertips. Back to the presence of the person in front of her. One regular, a nurse named Ellie, used to joke, "You're the only person who can make caffeine feel calming." Raya just laughed, but she knew why. It wasn't the coffee, it was the attention. The Buddha once said, "When walking, just walk. When sitting, just sit. Above all, don't wobble." Raya lived that. In a world addicted to wobbling. One afternoon, a man burst in, frantic. His phone had died. He was late for a pitch. He spilled his order twice in his rush. But Raya didn't scold. She simply placed the cup on the counter slowly. Her bell chimed. He paused, looked up. And in that pause, he breathed. It lasted only a second, but it was enough. Presence doesn't need hours. It needs moments, noticed fully. Years passed. The cafe stayed small, never franchised, never changed hands, but its walls soaked in thousands of quiet returns. One morning, Raya didn't show up. A handwritten sign appeared. "Back in 3 days, practicing stillness." Customers waited, and when she returned, they smiled. Because somehow, Her absence had reminded them. Even a barista needs to refill the cup. The bell still chimed, still soft, still enough. A sound that said, "You're here, be here." The Buddha sat beneath a sal tree where the light filtered through in flickering gold. The breeze played gently with the hem of his robe, and the scent of early jasmine lingered in the air. Around him, the monks gathered like ripples around a pebble dropped in a still pond. Quiet, present, steady. They bowed one by one and took their seats on the grass, robes the colour of ochre and clay. The forest around them hummed with life, birds calling from high branches, the distant crack of bamboo, and the low murmur of wind moving through tall grass. The Buddha's eyes remained half lowered, still and soft. Then from the circle, a young monk rose. He was thin, his frame taut with discipline, but his brow was furrowed, his lips pressed with quiet unrest. He stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Master," he said, "I have studied the teachings as best I can. I rise before dawn. I recite every sutra. I memorize every verse. I follow every precept. And still, I suffer. Still my mind is troubled. I fear I've become attached to the very teachings meant to free me." He hesitated. Am I clinging to the Dharma itself? The Buddha looked upon him gently. "You remind me of a traveler," he said. "Let me tell you a story." The monks settled deeper into stillness. The forest too seemed to pause. "There was once a man," the Buddha began, "wandering through a thick and treacherous forest. The trees were close, the thorns sharp. On all sides he was hemmed in by danger, wild beasts, hunger, cries in the distance that made his skin crawl. For hours, maybe days, he pushed forward, uncertain and afraid, until he came to a wide, roaring river. On the other side, he could see sunlight falling on an open path. He saw smoke curling from a distant hut. Safety, rest, the way forward. The Buddha paused, letting the image take shape. But there was no bridge, no boat. The current was fierce. He could not swim across without being swept away. So the man worked. He cut branches, wove reeds, bent saplings into shape. With patience, sweat, and determination, he fashioned a raft, just strong enough to carry him. He clutched it tightly, guided it across the swirling water. His heart pounded with fear, but he reached the far bank, soaked, trembling, but alive. The Buddha's eyes swept slowly across the circle of monks. "Now imagine," he continued, "that once on land, the man looked at the raft and said, 'This has saved me. This is precious. I will carry it with me always.' And so he lifted it onto his shoulders and continued his journey, the heavy wood digging into his back, slowing his steps, wearing him down." A faint rustle of recognition moved through the group. "Would that make sense?" the Buddha asked. The monks shook their heads. "Of course not," the Buddha said. "The raft served its purpose. It brought him across. To carry it afterward, to cling to it, would only bring suffering." He turned to the young monk. "So too with the Dharma." The monk blinked, uncertain. "But the teachings are sacred," he said. "Aren't they to be kept close? Aren't they the source of liberation?" The Buddha nodded. "They are sacred, but sacred does not mean permanent. The Dharma is not a cage. It is not a burden to be shouldered forever. It is a tool, a raft, a means to cross the river of confusion and craving. Once you have crossed, you need not drag the boat behind you. Another monk raised his hand. "Master," he asked softly, "what if one forgets or finds themselves back at the river?" "Then rebuild the raft," said the Buddha. "Relearn, begin again, but never mistake the raft for the shore. The Dharma is not the destination, it is the guide." A hush followed, filled only by the hush of the wind and the rhythmic clicking of cicadas. Later that evening, as the sun descended behind the line of trees and turned the sky to a warm, bruised lavender, the monks returned to their huts, some with new questions, others with lighter hearts. But the young monk lingered. He wandered to the river near the monastery, where the water curled gently around stones and reeds. He sat on the bank, knees pulled in, and listened. The moon had begun its slow rise, casting silver light across the ripples. The monk breathed deeply. He thought of the teachings he had memorized, the sutras chanted, the rules obeyed, the rituals performed. Each had been a plank, a vine, a thread in the raft that carried him across his inner storm. He remembered the fear that had driven him to this path, the grief of his father's death, the anger he once held like a fire in his chest, the shame of worldly desire. Each teaching had helped him cross some inner current, but now, here he sat, dry but weary, clutching the raft as though it were still necessary. And he saw. He had carried not just the teachings, but his pride in them, his fear of failure, his guilt for each imperfect thought, his grasping for perfection, and all of these too were rafts, built to carry him through old pain, meant to be honored, yes, but then let go. He closed his eyes. The breeze shifted. The night deepened. By morning, he rose and returned to the Buddha. He bowed low, his hands open, his heart quiet. "I have crossed," he said softly, and the Buddha replied, "Then walk freely." No further instruction, no ceremony. Just a smile, the kind that sees without needing to explain. Because truth, like a raft, is not meant to be worshipped. It is meant to be used, held for a time, then released. And so the monk walked on, not empty, but unburdened. He still chanted, still meditated, still studied the sutras. But now he did so not out of fear, not to be perfect, but because he understood their purpose. They were not chains, they were maps, and once you arrive, you do not need the map to breathe. Years later, when a new monk came with the same question, full of guilt, clinging to rules like a man clutching driftwood, he told him of the raft. He pointed to the river and smiled. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. Once there was a king who ruled over a vast and golden land. His palace was made of marble and sandalwood. His robes shimmered with threads of moonlight. His name echoed through the valleys like a song carried on wind. But one day, in the middle of a grand festival, the king grew suddenly tired. He stepped away from the court, laid down in the shade of a fig tree, and closed his eyes, just for a moment. And in that moment, he dreamed. In the dream, He was no longer a king. He was a farmer. His hands were calloused. His home was a straw hut. He tilled the soil each morning, worked through sweat and storm, and fell asleep beside a dying lantern. Years passed in this dream. He married, had children, lost crops, buried a son. He aged, sickened, and finally lay dying in his dream bed of straw, holding his daughter's hand. As he drew his last breath, he awoke, back under the fig tree, back in silk, back in the sound of distant music from the palace. No time had passed. Only the blink of an eye. He sat up and wept. This is the story of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and illusion. Commentary. The Buddha once said, "This world is a dream, a bubble, a shadow. See it as such." But it does not mean the world is meaningless. It means that clinging to the dream, believing it is the whole of reality, is what causes suffering. The king's dream felt real. He loved, he cried, he endured, and yet it was only a flicker in his mind. When he awoke, he was still himself, still whole, still the same awareness, only now clearer. So too with rebirth. You are born into a form, live a life, gather names, habits, memories, and when that form ends, the awareness that knew it does not die. It simply moves, like a dreamer waking into another dream. Samsara is not a punishment. It is a lesson, a series of dreams to awaken from. Not by denying them, but by seeing through them. When the king returned to court, he no longer ruled with pride. He ruled with humility, with tenderness, as one who knew that even a crown is made of the same dust as a farmer's hoe. He often sat under that same fig tree in silence. When people asked why, he would only say, "That is where I remembered." One day, he invited monks to his court. Among them was a sage known for his stillness. The king asked him, "How do I know which world is the dream and which is true?" The monk replied with a smile, "Ask the one who is watching them both." Who is that? The witness, the awareness, the one who saw the king dreaming of the farmer, the one who sees you dreaming this life. It is not your name, not your face, not even your memories. It is that which knows, always watching, always here, even as the dream changes. This is the mind beyond mind, the unshaken center, the part of you that does not sleep, even when the body rests. The Buddha's teachings do not try to wake you with alarm bells. They whisper. They let you walk the path until one day, under a tree or beside a river or in a quiet moment between breaths, you see it for yourself. This is a dream. And yet, I am real. The king died many years later, not in fear, but as one who knew how dreams begin and end. He left behind a poem carved into the fig tree. When I was awake, I thought I ruled. When I slept, I thought I served. Now I know I am neither. I am the dreamer and the waking. So when the world feels heavy or the illusion too thick, sit quietly. Breathe and ask yourself, what part of me is watching this? Not to escape the dream, but to wake kindly inside it. He sat beneath the Bodhi tree, its roots like arms cradling the earth. its leaves trembling in the hush before dawn. Siddhartha was still, not because he had nothing left to do, but because he had found the one thing worth doing. The grass beneath him held the warmth of day's memory. The river nearby whispered its ancient lullaby. Above, stars thinned into morning. And within him, the silence grew deep. He had made his vow to remain unmoved until he had reached the end of suffering. And so he breathed, in, outside. The body sat like a mountain. The mind watched like the sky. But truth, before it flowers, is always tested, and so came Mara. Mara, the tempter, the king of illusion, the force of resistance in all beings who inch toward awakening. He did not come in one form, but many, not with a single sword, but with 1,000 voices. First, Mara sent desire. His daughters appeared, radiant and swaying. Their forms shimmered with beauty. Their voices sang sweet lullabies of longing and delight. They danced before the still figure under the tree, their laughter like bells. But Siddhartha did not stir. Their beauty held no hook. His gaze did not linger. He saw not bodies, but masks, not pleasure, but impermanence. Desire passed like perfume on the wind. Then Mara sent fear. The sky darkened, thunder cracked, demons emerged from shadows, fangs bared, eyes aflame, weapons of fire and bone in hand. They rushed the tree, screamed into Siddhartha's ears, hurled spears of doubt and arrows of terror. But Siddhartha did not flinch. The weapons turned to lotus petals as they neared him. The demons screamed, but their voices died in the vast silence that surrounded him. Fear had no place where nothing was clung to. Next came pride. Mara appeared himself, seated atop a colossal elephant, cloaked in glory. He laughed with disdain. "Who do you think you are?" he asked. "A prince playing holy man. What gives you the right to seek truth? You are alone, no teacher, no witness." Siddhartha looked up, calm and clear. He reached his right hand to touch the earth. And the earth responded. It is said that in that moment, the earth itself bore witness. The ground trembled gently. A breeze swept through the grove. The Bodhi tree's leaves shimmered like stars. The earth, vast and ancient, acknowledged Siddhartha's right to awaken. Mara's elephant stumbled. His illusions cracked. His army scattered like dust in wind. The tempter vanished, and all was still again. But the night was not yet over. With Mara gone, Siddhartha turned inward, deeper than ever before. He saw his past lives, hundreds, thousands, as farmer and king, as bird and beggar, as woman, child, beast, each life carrying joy and sorrow, birth and death. He saw the law of karma, how intentions shaped outcomes, how cruelty echoed, how kindness grew roots across lifetimes. He saw the chain of suffering, ignorance giving rise to craving, craving to clinging, clinging to becoming, becoming to birth, birth to decay and death. He saw that to break the chain, one must see clearly and let go. The dawn approached. The sky shifted from indigo to pale rose. Birds stirred in branches. The river shimmered. And in the first light of that new day, Siddhartha saw it, not as concept, not as hope, but as direct knowing. He saw the four noble truths, that suffering exists, that it arises from craving, that it can end, and that there is a path to its end. He saw the eightfold path unfolding before him like stepping stones across a great river. He saw suffering, and he saw its end. And in that moment, as the sun broke the horizon and the world breathed anew, Siddhartha became the Buddha, the awakened one. He opened his eyes, and the dew on every leaf sparkled with the same truth. Mara had been defeated, not with sword, not with spell, but with stillness, with clarity, with the earth itself as witness. The man who had walked away from gold and pleasure, who had starved beside the river, who had sat unmoved through storm and illusion, had now touched the infinite. And he smiled, not with triumph, but with compassion, because now he would teach, and the world would begin to wake. The gates of Kapilavastu had not changed. They still stood tall and carved with symbols of victory, still flanked by soldiers in polished armor, still framed by the scent of sandalwood and rose water poured in offering. But the man walking toward them now was not the same prince who once slipped away into the dark, his silks folded neatly beside a sleeping child. He wore no crown, no jewelry, only the ochre robes of a wandering monk, faded by sun and softened by dust. His feet were bare, his hands folded around a simple begging bowl. And though the guards stiffened at the sight of him, there was something in his stillness, his presence, that made them hesitate. "Is that?" one whispered. But the other could not answer, for it had been nearly 7 years since Prince Siddhartha vanished into the forest. 7 years since the kingdom was draped in grief and silence, since King Suddhodana walked the palace gardens alone, since Yasodhara raised their son Rahula beneath the weight of unanswered questions. Now the prince had returned, but not as a prince, not even as a man of the world. He returned as the Buddha, the awakened one. The message reached the palace like a whisper carried on wind. He has returned. In the great hall, King Suddhodana stood without speaking for a long time. Then, with deliberate steps, he left his throne. No guards followed him, no procession was summoned. He walked alone down the long stone corridor, past the memories carved into every wall. He found Siddhartha standing beneath the Bodhi tree that had been planted in the garden long ago. It was not the Bodhi tree, but it cast the same kind of peace, broad shade, dappled light, and the hush of old leaves. Father and son faced each other, one with hair white as ash and eyes heavy with time, the other with a shaven head and a face so calm it made the air feel still. "You left without a word," the king said at last, his voice steady but thick. "I had no words," the Buddha replied, "only the question. And now you return with answers. I return with understanding. Not to rule, but to teach. Not to reclaim, but to share." The king looked at him long and deeply, as if trying to trace the child he once cradled, the young man who rode out in golden chariots, the son who vanished like a dream before dawn. At last, the king nodded. "Then let your mother see you, and let the boy." Yasodhara did not run to meet him. She did not cry. She did not fall to her knees. She stood in the doorway of the inner chamber, her sari plain, her hair pulled back, her face worn not with age, but with waiting. "I knew," she said quietly, "I knew you had not died." The Buddha lowered his gaze. I died to what I was, he said, so that I could be born to what is. And us, she asked, what are we now? He stepped closer but did not reach out. The rules of a renunciant were clear. No touch, no home, no possession, and yet his eyes held something that made her breath catch. An ache, a reverence, a peace deeper than comfort. I carry you with me, he said, not in desire, but in truth. In knowing that even love must be freed from clinging to shine in full. Behind her, a boy's voice echoed through the hall. Mother, who is it? Rahula stepped into the light. He was 7, just tall enough to look up with question, just old enough to sense what was unspoken. His eyes, so like his father's, widened as he saw the man in robes. He looked at his mother, then back at the man. Is this? Yasodhara nodded slowly. This is your father. The boy approached carefully, drawn not by familiarity, but by gravity. The Buddha knelt, bringing his eyes level with the child's. Rahula looked at the robes, at the bowl, at the bare feet, dusty and calloused. You are a king, the boy said. I was, the Buddha replied, but everyone says you will always be a king. I have chosen another path. Why? The Buddha did not speak right away. Instead, he looked at Rahula, not with the eyes of a father returning, but with the gaze of one who sees the seeds of suffering in even the smallest questions. To be a king is to protect borders, he said. But the greatest kingdom is not land, it is the mind. I left to master that realm, and to help others do the same. Rahula stared at him, then reached out, tentatively, silently, and touched the bowl in his father's hands. Are you hungry? I eat only what is given freely. The boy blinked. I'll give. The next morning, as sunlight touched the eastern gate, the people of Kapilavastu gathered in the streets. They had heard. They had whispered. Some had doubted. Others had hoped. Now they saw. The Buddha walked barefoot through the city with his disciples behind him, his bowl held gently, his eyes neither lifted in pride nor lowered in shame. Just present. And beside him, a small boy walked, his steps careful, his face solemn. Who is that? People whispered. That is his son, someone said. That is Rahula. When the procession reached the palace gates again, Rahula turned to his mother. I want to go with him, he said. Yasodhara's heart trembled. You are still young, she whispered. You have not seen the world. But I have seen him, Rahula said, and he is the world. She knelt and held his face in her hands, kissed his forehead, and let him go, not out of abandonment, but out of trust. Rahula turned to his father. Teach me. That night, under a canopy of stars, the Buddha gave his son the precepts. A child novice, a seeker born not of blood, but of choice. He named him Rahula, not in casual use, but in truth. Fetter. For that is what the boy had been once, a golden chain pulling at his heart. But now the chain had turned to light. Not attachment, but connection. Not weight, but legacy. The Buddha looked at his son as he slept beside the fire, curled in a robe too big, holding a wooden begging bowl like a treasure. And for a moment, the silence was not empty. It was full. Years later, Rahula would become a monk in full, respected for his insight and restraint. He would ask deep questions and receive answers not as a prince's son, but as a seeker in his own right. But none would forget that first night. When the Buddha returned, not with chariots, but with calm, not to rule, but to gaze into his son's eyes, and say, without speaking, "I left so you would not inherit illusion. I returned so you could choose the truth." And in that silent gaze was everything a father could offer and everything a seeker could need. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. In one hand, he carries a book, the Prajnaparamita Sutra, the perfection of wisdom. In the other, he wields a sword, long, luminous, and aflame with clarity. He rides a lion, not to show power, but to symbolize the fearlessness of insight. This is Manjushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom, where Avalokiteshvara brings compassion, where Samantabhadra brings vow and action. Manjushri brings the sharp, radiant truth. His name means gentle glory, but his wisdom is not soft. It does not comfort. It cuts. It slices through illusion with the precision of a blade honed on silence. The sword he carries is not for battle. It is for discernment. It separates appearance from reality, self from no self, thought from knowing. It reveals what we are too afraid to see and too free not to see. In the old sutras, it is said that Manjushri's wisdom is so sharp, he was enlightened before the Buddhas of the past. He is the eternal teenager of the Mahayana pantheon, ever young, ever clear, ever unburdened by delusion. Where others hesitate, Manjushri speaks. Where others follow rules, Manjushri asks why. Where others cling to views, Manjushri lets go, again and again and again. One day a monk asked him, "What is the nature of ultimate reality?" And Manjushri drew his sword in the air, then lowered it slowly, as if slicing through something invisible. That was his answer. Because words can't always hold wisdom. Sometimes it must be shown. In Zen temples, the figure of Manjushri is often placed behind the Roshi's seat, not as decoration, but as a reminder that true teaching must be rooted in clarity, that every word spoken should come from a place that has already cut through ego, opinion, attachment. The teacher, like Manjushri, must see clearly before they speak. There is a famous koan. A young monk full of doctrine said to the master, "I've memorized the Heart Sutra. I understand emptiness. There is no I, no ear, no mind, no path, no attainment." The master pointed to a bowl of rice and said, "Then eat, because understanding is not the point. Living is." This is what Manjushri teaches, wisdom that is not locked in scriptures, but embodied, applied, lived. The sword is not aggressive, it is necessary to wake us, to free us, to carve away the clinging and the confusion until only truth remains. Not an idea, but a mirror with no dust. There's a story told in the mountains. A disciple sat meditating, trying to silence his thoughts. He came to Manjushri in prayer and asked, "Please cut away my illusions." That night, in a dream, Manjushri appeared. He said nothing, only lifted his sword and placed it gently on the disciple's shoulder, not to strike, but to remind him the blade is not outside you, it is within. Commentary. Manjushri does not give you answers. He gives you the means to see for yourself. That is his wisdom, not dogma, but discernment, not belief, but perception stripped of filter. The sword cuts two ways. It cuts through ignorance, but also through comfort. It forces us to ask, what have I built my life on? And what happens when that is no longer solid? Can I let go? Can I breathe? Even when the ground beneath me vanishes. Wisdom is not knowing more. It is needing less. It is silence that doesn't need applause. It is clarity that does not waver in the dark. It is the ability to sit in confusion and not flinch, to stand before illusion and not bow, to name what is and let go of what is not. The lion Manjushri rides is not a beast of war. It is the mind that has been tamed. The roar is no longer fear. It is the roar of reality unfiltered. The courage to face things as they are. There's a quiet danger in spiritual life. We want wisdom to feel good, to validate us, to comfort the parts of us that ache. But Manjushri reminds us, true wisdom will sometimes hurt. It will dismantle the story we've told ourselves. It will whisper, you are not who you think you are. And if we listen, the story ends and life begins. In your own practice, the sword appears in many forms. The question you can't answer. The moment you realize you've been wrong. The teacher who looks you in the eye and says nothing because anything they say would only get in the way. That is the sword, cutting gently, so you can see clearly. You don't have to fear it. You have to wield it. In kindness, in honesty, in the decision to no longer live half asleep. When you chant, chant with the sword. When you bow, bow with the sword. When you love, love with the sword. Not to harm, but to see clearly what love is. Because love without wisdom is sentiment, and wisdom without love is cold. But together, they are Manjushri and Avalokiteshvara, and the path itself. Before time was measured by stars, before mountains were named, before the sutras had been spoken, there was a vow. A single vow, whispered not to the heavens, but to the suffering of the world. I will not enter nirvana until all beings are free. This was the vow of Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion, not a god, not a savior, but a being who heard the cries of the world and stayed. In Sanskrit, his name means the one who hears the sounds of the world. In China, he is Guanyin, the one who listens. In Tibet, Chenrezig, the gentle-eyed protector. In Japan, Kannon, the goddess with a gaze like soft rain. He takes many forms, male, female, neither, all, because compassion is not bound by gender. It is a response, a presence, a hand that reaches out before the mind decides whether or not to help. The story begins long ago in the celestial realms where Avalokiteshvara practiced deeply and tirelessly. Lifetime after lifetime, he worked to free beings from suffering. He taught, he healed, he carried, he wept, and still the suffering did not end. Every time a life was soothed, 10 more were in pain. Every time one was saved, another was lost. One day, Avalokiteshvara stood at the edge of reality and looked down upon the world. He heard every cry, every mother losing a child, every man begging for bread, every animal caught in a trap, every being trapped in anger, desire, confusion. And in that moment, his heart broke. Not figuratively, it shattered. His body split into pieces, his head burst into 11 parts, his arms cracked and fell. His vow seemed too vast, the pain of others too great. And from the silence that followed, he wept. "I have failed," he whispered. "I cannot save them all." But the universe listens in strange ways, and just as Avalokiteshvara reached the edge of despair, a light appeared. Amida Buddha, the Buddha of infinite light, came forth. Gently, patiently, lovingly. He gathered the pieces. He said nothing of failure, only this: you broke not from weakness, but because your compassion was real. And with a soft breath, Amida blessed Avalokiteshvara's broken form and transformed it. Now he had 11 heads to see in every direction and 1,000 arms, each with an eye in its palm to both see and act. Hands that could reach into every corner of the world. Hands that could soothe, protect, feed, carry, hold, mend. Not all hands were soft. Some held weapons to cut through illusion. Others held lotus flowers to cradle the broken. Some formed mudras of peace. Others reached out with empty palms. Each hand was compassion expressed. Each hand was love in action. This is why Avalokiteshvara did not abandon the world. Because even in despair, he did not turn away. Because real compassion isn't about success. It's about showing up again and again, even when it seems hopeless. Especially when it seems hopeless. There's a story told in temples. A monk once asked a master, "What is Avalokiteshvara doing with so many arms and eyes?" The master replied, "It's like a man reaching for a pillow in the night. He does it without thinking." That is the heart of compassion. No calculation, no pride, just the instinct to help. Because suffering is not theoretical. It is immediate, and so compassion must be too. In the iconography, each hand of Avalokiteshvara holds a symbol. A wheel, a bell, a jewel, a book, a rope, a vajra, a bowl, a tear. Because compassion wears many forms. Sometimes it's guidance, sometimes it's protection, sometimes it's nourishment, sometimes it's just being with someone who is grieving without fixing it. In one form, Avalokiteshvara appears with only 2 hands. One holds a lotus, symbol of purity rising from the mud. The other holds a vase, pouring the nectar of healing into the world. Because even with just 2 hands, if moved by compassion, you can save lives. In the Mahayana tradition, to walk the Bodhisattva path is to walk in Avalokiteshvara's footsteps, to take the vow, not for glory, not for escape, but for others, for the one crying next door, for the stranger across the world, for the part of yourself still in pain. There's a saying, when compassion truly arises, there is no I helping you, only the act itself. That is Avalokiteshvara. Not a being to worship, but a mirror, a reminder of what you already are. when you listen with your whole body, when you act before being asked, when you feel another's pain like your own and still choose to love. You become one of the 1,000 hands. Commentary. This story is not mythology, it's instruction. You may not have 1,000 arms, but you have one. You may not have an eye in every palm, but you have awareness, and that is enough. Avalokiteshvara broke not from weakness, but from caring too much, and instead of being punished for it, he was expanded. His brokenness became his beauty. His sorrow became his vow. So if you ever feel too tender for this world, if you feel like your heart breaks too easily, you are not broken. You are awakening. You are listening. You are already walking the path of Avalokiteshvara. The banks of the Ganges shimmered with morning light. Mist curled like white breath from the earth, and birds traced wide arcs above the water. The river flowed as it always had, unhurried, ancient, indifferent. Upon a small rise near the city of Gaya, the Buddha stood. His saffron robes caught the first golden threads of sunlight, and his presence seemed to quiet even the wind. Around him gathered 1,000 ascetics, silent, weathered, lean with years of discipline. Their robes were coarse, their skin bronzed by fire and wind. Their eyes held questions that words could not form. They had come to hear him, not because he promised liberation, but because he had found it. These were men who had walked barefoot on burning sand, who had held their breath until stars blurred in their vision, who had fasted until even hunger grew silent. They had known pain. They had studied sacred fire. They had chanted, scarred, endured. But they had not known peace. And so they came, not to challenge, but to listen. The Buddha began not with praise, nor with rules, nor with doctrine. He began with fire. All is burning, he said. A ripple moved through the crowd like wind across tall grass. He paused, let the silence stretch, like the space between flames. All is burning, he repeated. The I is burning, forms are burning, I consciousness is burning. He spoke slowly, deliberately, each word striking like a drumbeat in the still morning air. Burning with what? With the fire of lust, the fire of hatred, the fire of delusion? Some closed their eyes, others frowned. A few leaned forward, their breaths caught. The Buddha looked upon them, not with challenge, but with compassion. This body you cling to, he said, it is a wick. This mind you chase through craving, a spark. And each time you grasp, each time you say, mine, you feed the fire. A breeze moved across the Ganges. It stirred the edges of robes. It cooled nothing. The Buddha continued. The world is ablaze, but not with wood and coal. It burns with longing, with grasping, with thirst. He walked slowly among them, not above, not apart. His steps made no sound. Eyes that chase beauty, ears that crave praise, tongues that seek sweetness, minds that hunger for permanence. He turned and lifted his simple alms bowl. This too is not mine. It holds food today. Tomorrow, it may be empty. I thank it either way. From the back, an old ascetic raised his hand. Are we to abandon joy? He asked. Is not joy the goal? The Buddha smiled faintly. "No," he said, "not joy, only the craving for joy. Let joy arise. Let it come like wind through trees. But do not chase it. Do not bind to it. Do not say, 'This is mine.' For the flame you grasp will burn your hand." Another monk asked quietly, "How do we live in a burning world?" The Buddha looked at him with eyes deep as a still lake. "Like a man who sees the blaze," he said, "who walks with care, breathes with wisdom, and holds no illusion that the fire is shelter." A hush fell over the gathering, not from fear, but from recognition. The fire was not only in the cities, or in war, or in anger. It was inside them, inside each grasping thought, each clenched desire. The Buddha sat upon the earth. He drew a circle in the dust with his finger. "Inside this circle," he said, "are your perceptions, your feelings, your ideas. They rise like smoke. They change like flame. They disappear like ash. Do not build your home in a fire." A younger monk, no more than 20 summers old, whispered, "Then where do we dwell, Master?" The Buddha looked up. "In awareness," he said, "in equanimity, in the space between sparks. Be the witness, not the fuel." The monks bowed their heads. Some wept, not from sorrow, but from something else. From release, from clarity, from the sudden lightness of realizing they could put something down. That night, they built no fires. There were no chants, no ceremonies. They ate simply, drank river water, and sat in silence. But the silence was not empty. It was watchful. Each monk sat with his own flickering flame. Some remembered the pain of hunger they had forced upon themselves. Others remembered the pride they had felt when praised for discipline. Some saw anger they had not named, others grief, and they did not suppress these fires. They simply watched. And in the watching, something shifted. Not extinguished, but no longer fed. In the days that followed, the change was quiet but real. Monks who had once worshipped sacred flame, who had walked barefoot on coals, branded their skin, sat in the sun for days, now turned to a gentler discipline. They practiced release. They rose with the sun. They swept the courtyard slowly. They bowed not to fire, but to understanding. When visitors asked them what the Buddha had taught that morning, they did not recite scriptures. They did not speak of rebirth or karma or cosmology. They said only, "He showed us the fire and told us we did not have to live in it." The fire sermon was spoken many times across the years, but none more powerful than that first morning on the river bank, when the smoke from the city's cooking fires curled upward, mirroring the craving in every heart, and the Buddha, with nothing in his hands and peace in his gaze, simply said, "Let it burn, let it pass, and do not be consumed." As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. There was a spider who spun her web in the rafters of the meditation hall. No one noticed her at first. She was small, thin-legged, her thread finer than the morning mist. But slowly as the days passed, her web grew, spanning beam to beam. A fragile bridge suspended in stillness. A young monk sweeping the floors one morning looked up. He paused. Something about the web held him. It glimmered faintly in the dawn light, each thread stretching toward another as if in quiet conversation. he brought his discovery to the abbot. "Should I remove it?" he asked. "It doesn't belong in the hall." The abbot looked up, tilted his head, smiled. "She belongs exactly where she is," he said, "and perhaps she's teaching more than we are." From that day forward, the monks left the web untouched. They meditated beneath it, bowed in its presence, watched as dew sometimes gathered along its strands, like pearls of stillness. One day, the young monk saw a tiny gnat caught in the web. He felt a pang of sorrow, moved closer, but before he could act, the spider emerged, wrapped the insect, and retreated. He asked the abbot again, "How can something so beautiful cause harm?" The abbot nodded slowly. "A web is not cruel," he said. "It is simply a truth." He continued, "Connection is not always comfort, but everything touches everything else." He gestured around the hall. "You see walls, mats, windows, candles, but they are not separate." He pointed up. "That spider reminds us. One thread trembles, and the whole web feels it." The monk began to notice more. How a sharp word at breakfast changed the tone of the morning. How a kind gesture rippled through the day. How his own thoughts, when tangled, echoed outward into others. One evening during Zazen, a gust of wind slipped through the shutters. The spider's web quivered, and every monk in the room turned slightly. Not toward the wind, but toward the movement of the web, as if they all felt it at once. There is a teaching in the Avatamsaka Sutra. In the realm of Indra's net, each jewel reflects all others. To touch one is to touch the whole. The spider did not preach. She simply spun, her work invisible until noticed, and then unforgettable. Months later, the web collapsed in a storm. Gone, no trace. But the young monk no longer looked for it above. He had begun to see the web everywhere. In the way the cook's ladle touched the soup pot. In the way the bell echoed down the hallway. In the way a smile from a stranger reached deep into his chest. Everything. Connected. Everything. Touching. Nothing. Alone. A novice had a restless mind. He tried to sit, tried to breathe, tried to still the thoughts, but each time he closed his eyes, his mind swirled. Lists, regrets, what ifs, what nexts. He couldn't find peace, and the more he tried to force stillness, the louder everything seemed to become. One morning, after failing again to meditate, he stood up in frustration. "I'm broken," he muttered. And he walked, head down, steps fast, until he nearly collided with the old groundskeeper, Master Rio. Rio was known for his silence. He didn't teach. He didn't lecture. He just tended the gardens and cleaned the gutters. But he had been at the temple longer than anyone. The novice bowed clumsily. "Forgive me, Master." Rio tilted his head, studying him. "You're not breathing like a monk," he said. The novice looked up, startled. Rio turned, motioning for him to follow. They walked in silence through the bamboo grove to the kitchen courtyard, where a wide clay bowl stood filled with clear water. "Sit," Rio said. The novice sat. Rio picked up a small stick, and without a word, he stirred the water, gently at first, then faster, until the surface churned and the reflection broke into chaos. The novice watched. Then Rio set the stick down. They sat in silence. The bowl shimmered, then slowed, then stilled. The novice could suddenly see his own face again in the reflection. Rio looked at him and asked, "Did I make the water still?" The novice blinked. "Number it settled by itself." Rio nodded. "So will your mind." And he walked away. This is the story of trusting the stillness beneath disturbance. Commentary. Many people believe meditation is about forcing silence, forcing peace, erasing all thought. But in truth, it is about letting the water settle. Your mind is like a bowl of clear water. Every thought, every worry, every fear is like a stick stirring it. The more you react, the more you stir. The more you chase silence, the more turbulence you create. But if you sit and breathe and wait without judgment, the water begins to settle on its own. This is the natural wisdom of the mind. You don't need to fix it. You need to allow it. There's a Zen saying, "Muddy water clears itself if left alone." The novice learned something that day, not from a sutra, not from a formal teaching, but from water. He stopped fighting his thoughts. Instead, he watched them. Like leaves drifting across a pond. He stopped demanding they leave, and instead bowed as they passed. And slowly, something began to shift, not instantly, but gently, like the bowl that stopped churning the moment no hand stirred it. This is how peace comes. Not by control, not by perfection, but by patience, by the quiet knowing that nothing stirred stays stirred forever. If you are anxious, sit like the bowl. If you are overwhelmed, breathe like the wind that forgets itself. If you are angry, wait like the pond after rain. It will pass, all of it. And when it does, clarity returns. You'll see your reflection again. Not because you forced it, but because you didn't run. So next time you feel lost in thought, don't fix, don't flee, just wait. And let the water be water. It was night when the master pointed. The moon hung low over the monastery roof, pale and full, casting silver light across the silent garden. A group of monks stood beside him, robes drawn tight against the wind. The master raised his hand and extended one finger toward the sky. "See that?" he said. The students nodded. "The moon." He shook his head. "Number that is the finger." Then he smiled softly. "And what it points to is the moon." The monks stood still, unsure. The wind moved the trees. The master lowered his hand and whispered, "Don't mistake the finger for the moon." This is one of the most repeated teachings in Zen, because the mind is hungry for signs, hungry for symbols, hungry for teachers, for teachings, for shapes and systems. It sees the finger and calls it truth, but the finger is just pointing. It is not the truth itself. Imagine you're lost in the forest. A guide lifts a lantern. You follow the light, but mistake the lantern for the destination. You begin polishing it, worshipping it, writing poems about its handle and flame. But you never leave the forest, because the lantern was not meant to be your home. It was meant to show you the path. That's what Zen does. It points, but if you hold too tightly to the pointing, you never arrive. Buddha's words, the sutras, the rituals, even meditation, They are fingers, beautiful, wise, luminous fingers. But if you cling to them, if you name them truth, you stop short of the moon. A monk once asked his teacher, "What is the nature of ultimate reality?" The teacher held up a flower, just a flower. The monk bowed. He understood, because the flower was not the answer. It was the invitation to stop asking, to just see, to be. There's a story of a man crossing a river. The bridge is narrow, the current strong. Halfway across, he freezes, looks down at the water and panics. He shouts to a traveler behind him, "Help me understand this bridge." The traveler laughs gently. "You don't need to understand it," he says. "Just walk." Zen does not fear the unknown. It welcomes it, because the unknown is where truth lives. Not in definitions, but in direct experience. Not in the finger, but in the sky beyond it. Many people come to Zen hoping for words that explain. But the moment something is explained, it is no longer what it was. It becomes a concept, a mental model, and reality, true, breathing, silent reality, evaporates behind the map. Once, a young monk read every sutra he could find. He could recite the Eightfold Path, the 5 aggregates, the 4 Noble Truths. He knew Sanskrit terms. He quoted the Buddha with reverence. But he was restless. He asked his teacher, "Why do I still feel distant from awakening?" The teacher smiled and walked him outside. The moon was rising. The teacher pointed. The student followed the finger. "See it?" the teacher asked. "Yes," the monk said. "The moon." The teacher chuckled. "Number, that's still my finger." The monk blinked, and then, like a soft breeze over water, he understood. To point is not to possess. To teach is not to trap. Even the Buddha said, "My teachings are like a raft, meant to cross the river, not to carry on your back once you reach the shore." But many cling to the raft. They decorate it, argue over whose raft is best, then forget to cross. The finger and the moon, words and truth, map and terrain. All teachings are like this. Zen does not dismiss the finger, but it urges you not to stop there. Because no teacher can give you the moon. They can only point. The rest is silence, attention, direct seeing, commentary. This koan is not just about Zen. It is about how we relate to everything. A lover says, "I love you," and we cling to the phrase, replaying it in our minds. But the real love was in the look, in the moment, in the breath before the words. The words were the finger, the love was the moon. We read books about mindfulness, but forget to be mindful. We quote wise sayings, but live unawake. We chase spiritual techniques, but miss the moment itself. The way the light falls through leaves, the sound of tea being poured, the feel of wind on bare skin. These are the moon, director, immediate, alive. When you sit in meditation, thoughts will rise, names, labels, questions. That's the finger, let it point. But keep looking beyond, to what has no name, no answer, only presence, only this, only now. If you walk away with only the finger, you miss everything. But if you let it lead you, quietly, gently, without clinging, you may one day look up and find yourself under the full moon, smiling, and no longer needing to explain why. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. In the still hush before dawn, the palace of Kapilavastu stirred with the soft rustle of silks and the distant rhythm of footfalls on marble. The world outside was already unfolding, but within the gilded walls where Prince Siddhartha lived, every petal was sheltered from the wind of suffering. No wrinkles marred the faces of the attendants. No cries of illness echoed through the halls. No one spoke of death. His father, King Suddhodana, had ensured that his son knew only ease, beauty, and delight. The astrologers had predicted that the young prince would become either a great king or a holy man who would renounce the world. Fearing the latter, the king built a world without shadows. Flowers were changed before they wilted. Servants were chosen for their youth and radiance. Pain was not allowed to show its face. But truth, like the sun, cannot be hidden forever, and yearning, like a seed buried deep, will reach for the light even through stone. On a day shaped like any other, Siddhartha requested to ride beyond the palace gates. He was 29, cloaked in fine fabric and surrounded by careful illusions. Yet something inside him whispered of incompleteness, like a bell struck in the distance that would not stop ringing. There was a tightness in his chest he could not name, a hollowness that no feast or dance could fill. The charioteer Channa guided the prince through the streets of the city. The morning was bright, the people beautiful, the air filled with jasmine. Musicians played in courtyards, children laughed in sunbeams, all seemed perfect. But then the illusion cracked. At the edge of a quiet street, they saw a man hunched and trembling. His hair was white, his back bowed by years. His skin sagged like parchment, and his hands clutched a stick. He moved slowly, as though the air itself had thickened around him. Siddhartha leaned forward. "Channa," he asked, "what is wrong with that man?" "That is old age, my lord," Channa replied. "It comes to all who live long. The body weakens, the bones bend, the senses dull. No one escapes it." The prince stared at the man as he passed. The way he paused to catch his breath. The way his eyes seemed clouded with time. Siddhartha's hands gripped the side of the chariot. "Will this come to me?" he asked. "Yes, my lord, to you, to me, to all." Siddhartha fell silent. The first veil had lifted. The garden he had lived in was not eternal. Beneath the fragrance was decay. Beneath the music was silence. The next day, restless and inwardly stirred, he asked to go again. And again the world revealed another layer. As they turned a corner, Siddhartha saw a man collapsed by the roadside. His face was contorted in pain, his skin grey and clammy. His limbs twisted unnaturally, and he coughed as if his lungs were full of fire. "And this?" Siddhartha asked. "This is sickness, my lord," Channa said gently. "It strikes without warning. It takes the strong and lays them low. There is no rank or title that shields against it." The prince watched as a woman tried to cool the man's brow, her eyes wide with helplessness. A child clung to her skirts. Siddhartha turned away, but the image would not leave him. How many in his palace had hidden such suffering behind closed doors? How much of the world had he not seen? On the third day, the air hung heavy with heat. A solemn hush drifted through the streets. Siddhartha and Channa followed the sound of quiet chanting and saw a procession winding through the alleys. Men carried a shrouded form on a wooden bier, garlands laid across it. Behind them, mourners walked with bowed heads, incense curling in the air. "Is he asleep?" the prince asked, though he already knew. "He is dead, my lord," Channa replied. "This is the fate of all who are born." The prince felt something deep within him fracture. He watched the faces of the mourners, their grief like a tide with no shore. The man on the bier would never speak again, never eat, never laugh. All that he was had ended. And this comes to everyone. "Everyone, my lord. The rich, the poor, the wise, the foolish." Siddhartha did not speak on the way back. The chariot wheels hummed against the stone, but his thoughts made no sound. The world had split open. Beneath the silks, beneath the pleasures, there was something hollow, a truth too vast to ignore. He lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. His wife, Yasodhara, slept beside him. Their son, Rahula, breathed softly in the next room. And yet, peace evaded him. He saw the old man, the sick man, the corpse. He saw them behind every smile, beneath every ornament. He knew now that no palace could protect against time. No love could shield against loss. No beauty could outpace decay. And then, on the fourth day, they rode out once more. This time, they saw a man in saffron robes, walking barefoot along the path. His eyes were calm, his steps steady. He carried no gold, wore no jewelry. His face bore the lines of both suffering and peace. "Who is that?" Siddhartha asked. "A seeker, my lord," Channa said. "One who has renounced the world to find the path beyond birth and death. One who walks in search of freedom." Siddhartha watched him until he vanished into the distance. No guards flanked him, no luxuries trailed behind, and yet something about the man radiated a serenity deeper than anything Siddhartha had known. That night, the prince stood at the edge of his sleeping son's cradle, not daring to wake him. He touched the boy's soft cheek, his heart torn between two loves, the love of his family and the love of truth. He stepped into the garden one last time, its scent bittersweet. He bowed before the moonlit statue of his ancestors, and with each step toward the gate, he shed a piece of his former self, his earrings, his sword, his silks. He left that night, into the forest, into silence, into the unknown. The four sights had shattered his illusion, but they had also opened the gate. And on the other side of that gate was the beginning of a path. The path that would change the world. The young monk spoke with confidence. He had studied for years. He had memorized the sutras, debated the Dharma, written essays on emptiness and non-self. Now he stood before Master Obaku, hoping to impress him. "What is the ultimate truth of Buddhism?" he asked, bowing low. The question was polished, prepared, even reverent. But Obaku said nothing. Instead, he stepped forward and shouted, loud, sudden, like thunder cracking a still lake. The monk stumbled backward, heart racing. His thoughts vanished. His pride scattered like startled birds, and for a moment, just one brief, breathless moment, his mind stopped. No questions, no answers, just space, raw and awake. That was the lesson. A shout, not of anger, but of compassion, not to belittle, but to break, to shatter the walls of thinking that separate seeker from truth. In the Zen tradition, this is known as katsu, a fierce cry, a single wordless eruption that pierces through the mind's constant noise. Obaku used it like a blade, not to wound, but to cut away illusion, to jolt the student out of the fog of thought. Because sometimes you don't need more understanding, you need a wake-up call. Think of a dream. You're walking through it, believing it, responding to it. Then someone shouts your name. You jolt awake and realize none of it was real. Obaku's shout was like that, not a teaching, a waking. Years later, the monk returned. He bowed before Obaku and said, "I finally understand why you shouted." Obaku smiled and said, "Then forget that I ever did." Because even the memory of awakening can become another concept, another prison. Zen cuts not just through delusion, but through the attachment to insight itself. Obaku was a teacher of few words, but when he spoke or shouted, he struck deep. Once another student asked him, "What is the path to liberation?" Obaku raised his fist. The student said nothing, then bowed, because in that moment he understood. The path was this: not words about liberation, but the raw, silent, direct presence of the fist before him. Western minds often recoil from this. We're trained to expect kindness to be soft, truth to be calm, teachers to be gentle. But in Zen, compassion doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it roars, because the cage of the thinking mind is strong, and it takes a powerful noise to break it. Obaku's shout was not personal, it was not performance. It was pure action, free from hesitation, free from agenda. A sound that came from no self, and landed in the heart like a bell. Another story is told. A monk was dozing off during meditation. Obaku walked behind him, raised his staff, and struck the ground beside him, hard. The monk jolted upright, eyes wide. The master said only, "If you sleep through life, you will dream of Zen, but never wake to it." The monk bowed. He never fell asleep in the hall again. These moments are not cruel. They are kindness without comfort, because comfort can lull us into dreaming. But Zen is the practice of waking, again and again, until waking becomes your natural state, until presence is all you need. Imagine someone drowning in shallow water. You don't throw them a book about swimming. You pull them up, sometimes roughly, but always with love. That is Obaku's shout, a hand reaching through illusion, grabbing you by the robe and saying, "Wake up." Commentary. Not all teachings arrive gently. Some arrive like a storm, like cold water to the face, like a sound so loud it shakes the thoughts out of your spine. Because truth is not fragile. It doesn't need to be whispered. It just needs to be heard. And often the most compassionate thing a teacher can do is stop trying to explain and simply interrupt. Interrupt the story. Interrupt the me. Interrupt the years of polite ego dressed up as spirituality. Obaku knew this. He wasn't teaching Buddhism, he was teaching freedom. And sometimes freedom begins not with understanding, but with a single sharp, sacred shout. If you walk away from Zen with nothing but quotes, you've missed it. If you remember the stories but never felt the cut, you're still dreaming. But if something within you, some soft center you didn't know you had, felt this story not as words, but as thunder, then maybe, just maybe, you've begun to wake up. In the days when animals still spoke the language of the wind and trees, there lived a turtle in a wide, sparkling pond near the edge of a small village. The water was clean, the lilies bloomed, dragonflies shimmered like tiny blades of light, and frogs sang in harmony beneath the moon. And in the center of it all, floating lazily on a flat, sun-warmed rock, was a turtle with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue. He was clever, observant, wise even, but he had one weakness. He could not stop talking. This turtle, who in a past life had been the Buddha, spent his days offering advice to fish, telling stories to tadpoles, and correcting the herons who perched too long on the reeds. He spoke of the stars, of the weather, of the foolishness of men and the arrogance of birds. And many listened at first. But over time, some began to swim a little farther from his rock. The frogs coughed politely and leapt away. Even the dragonflies found quieter lily pads to rest on. Still, the turtle spoke. He spoke when no one was near. He spoke when others slept. He spoke not to be heard, but because silence felt like drowning. One summer, the rains did not come. The sky cracked but gave no water. The pond shrank. Lilies withered. The fish moved deeper, their numbers fewer each day. 2 wild geese, passing overhead, noticed the shrinking pond and circled down. They landed beside the turtle and dipped their beaks in the muddy shallows. "This place won't last much longer," one said. "Soon it will be dry." The other nodded. "We should help whoever we can." The turtle, curious, swam closer. "Help? How?" The first goose blinked. "We will carry the small fish to deeper waters, and if you like, we can carry you too." The turtle's eyes widened. "You would do that?" "Of course," said the second goose, "but only if you can stay silent." "Silent?" the turtle echoed. "Yes," said the first. "We will hold a stick between our beaks. You must bite down on the center and hold on. But if you speak, even one word, you'll fall." The turtle hesitated. Not talk? For an entire journey? He looked around. The pond was shrinking. His friends were gone. The mud cracked beneath the sun. He took a breath. "Very well," he said. "I will be silent." The next morning, the geese returned with a sturdy stick. They each gripped one end in their beaks. The turtle bit down on the center with determination. Together, they rose into the sky, wings strong, the turtle dangling like a pendant between them. He had never seen the world like this before. Forests stretched like ocean waves. Rivers wound like silver ropes. Hills rolled beneath them like sleeping beasts. And far below, people looked up and pointed. "Look!" a child cried. "A flying turtle!" Laughter rippled through the village. A man shaded his eyes. "What a strange sight! A turtle who thinks he's a bird." They laughed louder. They clapped and jeered. The turtle heard every word. His mouth tightened on the stick. He thought of clever comebacks, of biting remarks, of lessons he could teach these fools from above. And then he couldn't help himself. "I'll show you who's foolish." But the moment his mouth opened, he fell. Down, down through the sky, tumbling through wind and silence and regret until he struck the earth and never rose again. The geese circled once, then flew on. And below, the villagers stood in stunned silence beside the broken shell of the creature who could not stay silent. Later, when this tale reached the forest monasteries, a monk asked the Buddha, "Was the turtle's mistake pride?" "No," said the Buddha, "it was attachment. Not to his body, but to his voice, to the belief that every thought must be shared." He looked at the monk kindly. "There is wisdom in knowing when to speak, but greater wisdom in knowing when not to." And so, the story of the turtle who couldn't stop talking passed from village to village, not as mockery, but as reminder that words are like seeds. They grow even when we forget we've planted them, and some, if spoken at the wrong time, can fall like stones. Because restraint is not weakness. It is strength disguised as silence, and sometimes silence is the loudest wisdom of all. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. He never spoke a word, not to the monks, not to the villagers, not even when invited to tea by the abbot himself. He simply bowed and walked and bowed again. They called him the silent pilgrim. He had no belongings except a small cloth bag and thick wooden sandals worn smooth from years on the road. His face was weathered by wind and sun. His back slightly bent, not from age, but from reverence. Because every third step, he stopped, placed his palms together, and bowed to the earth. Step, step, bow, step, step, bow. He travelled like this for hundreds of miles, through rice paddies and dusty plains, through mountain passes and city streets, through cold rain, sharp sun, and falling snow. He never begged, never asked, never preached, only bowed. When he reached the gates of a remote temple high in the hills, a monk ran inside to announce, "The pilgrim has come." Curious, the monks gathered. Some stood with folded arms. Others watched from the steps. One scoffed, "What is this? A show?" Another whispered, "Surely he must be seeking merit or praise." But the abbot only smiled. "Wait. Watch." The pilgrim reached the stone path before the temple gate. Step, step, bow. His palms touched the gravel. His forehead met the earth. He rose slowly and continued. All morning he bowed up the path. By noon he had reached the courtyard. The air was silent, except for the soft crunch of gravel and the long breath between bows. Step, step, bow. By evening, he reached the base of the temple steps. He did not climb them. Instead, he bowed once more, then turned, and began his journey down the mountain. Step, step, bow. The monks were stunned. He never entered. He never asked to stay. He came all this way just to bow. The abbot nodded. And in bowing, he entered more deeply than any of us. This is the story of wordless devotion, of practice not performed, but lived in the marrow of each step. Commentary. In the West, we often think wisdom must be spoken. That truth arrives in grand lectures, eloquent teachings, powerful arguments. But sometimes the greatest teachings are silent. The silent pilgrim did not explain his path. He became it. With each bow, he gave himself to the moment, to humility, to gratitude, to presence. He bowed not to worship the earth, but to remember he belonged to it. In Buddhism, we bow not out of subservience. We bow to let go of the self, to surrender ego, to honor interbeing. The sky does not rise without the sun. The tree does not grow without the soil. You do not breathe without the generosity of everything around you. To bow is to remember that. The pilgrim didn't need a teacher. Every grain of dust was his teacher. Every blister, his scripture. Every bow, a verse in the sutra of the path. He asked for nothing, judged no one, corrected no teachings. He gave only his body, his time, his breath. That was his offering. That was his sermon. One monk, deeply moved, asked the abbot, "Should I walk like that? Bow like that?" The abbot said, "Not unless your heart is already bowing. It's not about copying the form. It's about sincerity. Some bow with their bodies and judge with their minds. Others bow with their actions and remain upright inside. But true bowing begins within. It is a quiet crumbling of pride, a surrender of the need to be seen, a softening into the now. There is a Zen phrase, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." The silent pilgrim had no preference for praise or obscurity, for arrival or delay. His goal was not the temple. His goal was the bow itself. Step, step, bow. Again and again, until there was no one left doing it. Only the gesture, only the giving, only the way. Wherever you are, whoever you are, you can bow too, not just with your body, but with how you listen, with how you wait, how you serve, how you show up for the dust on the floor or the silence in a friend's eyes. To bow is to soften, to slow, to remember what matters, and sometimes to say everything without a single word. In the heart of a wealthy city, wrapped in silk and stone, lived a man who had everything. Gold draped his halls. Ivory framed his mirrors. Incense curled in soft waves from brass burners that never cooled. His name was Viran. He owned land, warehouses, servants, even ships that crossed oceans bearing his name on their sails. And yet, he could not sleep. Each night, he turned beneath embroidered sheets, his mind counting coins like sheep. Each morning, he awoke with new orders, new demands, new acquisitions. He kept building, kept gathering, but inside there was a tightness he could not name. One day, as he stepped from his carriage, he noticed a beggar sitting beside the temple gate. The beggar's robe was faded and torn. His alms bowl was empty, but his eyes were calm, still as a pond before dawn. Viran glanced at him and scoffed. "If I had nothing," he said, "I would not smile." The beggar bowed. "If you truly had nothing," he said, "you might finally know peace." The words followed Viran like a shadow. He tried to forget them. tried to drown them in wine, in silk, in celebration. But they clung like a thread caught in the lining of his soul. The next morning, he returned to the temple. The beggar was still there, eyes closed, back straight, breath soft. "How do you do this?" Viren asked. "You have no food, no roof, no gold, and yet you sit like you own the world." The beggar opened his eyes. "I do not own the world," he said, "but the world no longer owns me." Viren stared. Something inside him cracked. That day he left behind his ring. The next, his jeweled belt. Then quietly, he began walking to the temple each morning, leaving behind one possession at a time. No ceremony, no announcement, just letting go, piece by piece. The beggar never asked, never praised. He simply shared his seat on the stone step. Weeks passed. One morning, Viren arrived barefoot. No rings, no silks, no guards, only his breath and the ache in his knees. He sat beside the beggar, closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt nothing pulling at him. No hunger for more, no fear of losing, no need to be seen, just stillness. He opened his eyes. "Have I become poor?" he asked. The beggar smiled. "No," he said softly. "You've become free." This is the story of true wealth, the kind that doesn't glitter, but glows from within. Commentary: wealth is not evil, it is neutral. Like a knife, it can feed or wound. Like fire, it can warm or consume. The Buddha taught that attachment, not possession, is the root of suffering. You can have little and still cling. You can have much and still be free. The beggar was not rich in gold, but he had space. He had his breath, his presence, his peace. He was not owned by anything, not even his own suffering. The parable reminds us, you are not your bank balance, not your reputation, not your wardrobe or your followers. You are the one who notices, the one who breathes, the one who can let go. Letting go is not about loss. It is about choice. When you no longer need a thing to feel complete, you are free to enjoy it or leave it without fear. That is the highest wealth. There's a Zen proverb, "When I had nothing, I had everything." It does not mean destitution. It means this: when your hands are not full of fear and control, they are finally open to life. So whether you own much or little, ask yourself, do these things serve me? Or do I serve them? If they crumble, do I crumble too? Or am I the same presence, the same breath, the same open sky? Regardless, true wealth is not counted. It is felt. It is the spaciousness of a mind that can sit still beside a bowl, empty or full, and smile just the same. Be that kind of rich, in the heart of the Himalayan foothills, where the clouds hung low and the trees grew tall enough to brush the sky. There lived an elephant, unlike any other. He was large, yes, towering and strong. But it was not his size that set him apart. It was his silence, his gentleness, the way he walked through the forest without disturbing a single leaf. The other animals called him Chadanta, though few ever spoke directly to him. They simply watched, from trees, from burrows, from the safety of shadow, as he moved like a mountain in motion. He was the Buddha in a past life. And this is the story of his strength, not in battle, but in sacrifice. Siddhartha lived alone by choice. He did not shun the world, but neither did he cling to it. He bathed in still lakes at sunrise. He ate from the same fig tree each day, taking only what he needed. When storms came, he broke branches to shelter smaller creatures. And when conflict stirred among the animals, he was the one they turned to, not for punishment, but for peace. Yet peace often invites jealousy, and far from the forest, deep within a palace carved of stone and silence, a queen sat with bitterness in her heart. She had once lived in that forest, a doe, soft-eyed and quiet, and long ago, when Siddhartha had ruled a great elephant herd, she had been among them. She had loved him, deeply, without condition, but he had never looked her way, never spoken her name, never returned what she offered. And so, in her next life, reborn as a queen, she remembered only the wound, and she wanted revenge. She summoned the royal hunter and said, "In the northern forest lives a white-tusked elephant. His hide is pale, his eyes are gold. Bring me his tusks, no matter the cost." The hunter hesitated. It is said that he is gentle, wise. "All the more reason," she said, "to prove that the gentle can bleed." And so, with blade and bow, the hunter traveled north, through jungle, through rain, through weeks of silence, until he found the clearing near the fig tree. There stood Siddhartha, still, listening to the wind. The hunter watched from behind the trees. He waited 3 days, but the elephant did nothing wrong. He did not rage, did not attack, did not falter. Only once did he cry out, and that was when he helped a small bird fallen from its nest. On the 4th morning, the hunter stepped forward. Siddhartha turned, and in that moment he knew. He saw the blade, saw the sorrow, saw the karma rising like fog. And yet, he did not move. "You have come for my tusks," he said. The hunter froze. "How did you—" "I remember," Siddhartha said. "She was hurt. She never let it go." The wind stirred the trees. The lake nearby rippled. "I will not fight you," he said. "Take what you came for." The hunter lowered his bow. "But I cannot kill you." "Then don't," said the elephant. "I will kneel. You may take the tusks. Spare the rest." And slowly, with the dignity of one who walks willingly toward pain, Siddhartha lowered himself to the earth. The hunter wept as he worked, not because the task was hard, but because the elephant never once flinched. When the blade cut deep, he did not cry out. When the ivory came free, he did not recoil. He only said quietly, "May she find peace now." The hunter carried the tusks back to the palace, and when the queen saw them, gleaming, perfect, wrapped in bloodied cloth, she felt no triumph, only weight. She touched them once, and then began to shake, for in that moment her memories returned fully, not of rejection, but of Siddhartha lifting a fallen calf, of standing watch while others slept, of refusing to harm a single creature even when threatened. And now, that being had offered his very body. For her. She collapsed, and in her next life, it is said, she returned to the forest as a healer, not to take tusks, but to mend wounds. the story of Chadanta spread far beyond the forest. Monks carved his image into cave walls. Children whispered his name when they felt afraid, not because he was mighty, but because he proved that strength is not in what you strike, but in what you endure for the sake of others. Because true power needs no roar, it needs no armor. It needs only presence and the willingness to give without hatred, even to those who once wished you harm. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. Hospice is not loud, it hums like twilight. Low lights, quiet steps, gentle beeping. And in room 7, the breathing was slow. Draw in, pause, let go. Again, the man in the bed was old, thin skin, tired eyes. Hands that had once built houses and held babies and shaken enemies' hands. Now they simply rested, still, soft, folded like leaves. Nora was his nurse, not young, not old. Calm eyes, a voice like warm water. She didn't rush, didn't flinch at grief. She moved like someone who had seen many endings and knew each one was different. This is not a story of drama. It's a story of breath, and the lesson it teaches when it leaves. The man, his name was Harold, had no visitors that week. His wife had passed years ago. Children scattered, caught in their own lives. Nora checked his vitals, fluffed his pillow, placed a cool cloth on his forehead. He looked at her once and said, "I'm afraid to let go." She didn't respond with philosophy, didn't offer reassurances. She just said, "Let's breathe together then." They sat in silence. Inhale, pause, exhale, again. Harold's breath was jagged at first, then smoother, then softer. He didn't need words. She didn't need noise. The Buddha once said, "As a flame blown out by the wind, so quiet is the mind of one who has understood." That night, Nora came back during her break, brought a small wooden statue, Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. She set it by the window. "Just someone to keep you company," she whispered. Harold blinked in thanks. As the hours passed, his breath grew shallow. Draw in, pause, let go, and one moment. The pause lasted longer. Nora leaned in. Stillness. No panic, no alarm, just the hush of release. She sat beside him for a while after, not because it was protocol, but because endings deserve presence too. Later, she cleaned the room gently, changed the sheets, lit a small candle, and placed the statue back in her pocket. Another nurse asked her, "How do you do this every day? Doesn't it get heavy?" Nora smiled softly. "It's not about carrying. It's about letting go over and over until even the grief becomes quiet." People think death is about final moments, but in truth, it's about how you breathe until you no longer need to. Harold had taught her something, not in words, but in how he met the moment, afraid, then still, then gone. The next morning, Nora placed a sticky note in her locker. It read, "Let go like breath." Just a reminder of what Harold gave back to her. In this life, we inhale ambition, loss, joy, sorrow. We hold so tightly. But the final wisdom is the exhale. Not to disappear, but to return everything we borrowed. The road to Kusinara was quiet, not silent, never that, but filled with the hush of a world preparing to let go. Leaves rustled without wind. Birds called, but softly, like they too were watching. The monks walked in silence, their robes brushing against dry earth. And at the front, supported by Ananda's steady hand, walked the Buddha. His body was frail. The form that had once walked hundreds of miles barefoot, that had sat unshaken through storms, through temptation, through hunger, now trembled with every step. His ribs showed like lines drawn in dust. His shoulders drooped like branches in drought. But his eyes were clear, bright, as steady as the day he left the palace gates. They reached a grove of sal trees on the outskirts of the small village of Kusinara. The Buddha paused. "Here," he said softly. "Let us rest here. This is a good place." The sal trees stood in silent formation, tall, pale, and blooming out of season, their white blossoms drifting like snow. Some monks whispered that the trees had awakened too, that nature itself knew what was coming. Ananda laid down a folded robe beneath his teacher's head. The others formed a soft ring around them, as if holding the space open, sacred and still. The Buddha reclined on his right side, in the lion's posture, facing west. His breathing was shallow but steady. The light of the setting sun turned the dust gold. "It is time," he said. "The body is like a worn cart, held together by straps and will. It has served its purpose. Let it be." Ananda knelt beside him, eyes already full of tears. "You always said not to cling," he whispered. "But I don't know how not to." The Buddha turned his gaze to his beloved attendant. "You have served with a heart free of self, Ananda, for 25 years, never once wavering. You have been my shadow in daylight, my shelter in storm. You are not losing me. You are gaining the path." Ananda bowed, his forehead to the earth. "But the world will feel so empty without your footsteps." The Buddha smiled gently. "Then fill it with your own." Word spread through Kusinara like a breeze stirring dry leaves. The Blessed One is near death. Men and women came with offerings, not of gold, but of rice, of garlands, of silence. Some stood at a distance, unable to speak. Others stepped forward and bowed low, their heads pressed to the soil. A blacksmith named Kunda came, humbly bearing a meal. A dish of mushrooms and tender greens, prepared with utmost care. The Buddha accepted it with gratitude and blessed the man. Later, as pain overtook him, he turned to Ananda. "Tell Kunda this," he said. "He should feel no regret. 2 meals in my life stand out. The first, offered by Siddhartha, gave strength for awakening. This one gives strength for release. Both are sacred. Both are complete." Ananda nodded, committing the words to memory. The sun dipped low. The monks gathered beneath the sal trees, their hearts heavy. Some sat in deep meditation. Others simply watched their teacher, afraid to blink. The blossoms continued to fall gently, like the breath of the world slowing down. The Buddha opened his eyes. "Perhaps some of you think the teacher is gone. We have no one to guide us now, but that is not so." His voice was calm, though each word required effort. "You must be your own lamps. Be a refuge unto yourselves. Take the Dharma as your island. Do not look outside for shelter." A long silence followed. Then he added, with clarity that cut through every grief, all compounded things are subject to decay. Strive with diligence. He closed his eyes and entered deep absorption, one state after another, like ripples fading across a pond. First through the four jhanas, then through the formless states, boundless space, boundless consciousness, neither perception nor non-perception, and then beyond. His breath slowed, then faded, then stopped. But the silence that followed was not empty, it was whole. The sal blossoms fell across his body. One landed gently on his brow. Ananda did not cry at first. No one did. The stillness was too vast. It reached into them. It opened a space that no sorrow could fill. A hush settled over the grove, deeper than sleep, deeper than night. Even the birds fell quiet. Even the wind held back. And then, as if cued by the moment, the sal trees swayed. Not with breeze, but with knowing, with reverence. The Blessed One had passed into parinirvana. They sat for hours, no words, no movement, just presence. Some monks touched their foreheads to the ground. Others sat upright, spine like a mountain, anchoring the grief in stillness. When finally the moon rose, round and full, like a soft eye watching from above, Ananda stood. "He is gone," he said softly, voice breaking. "No," whispered another monk, a younger one. "He is everywhere now." The cremation took place days later. They built a pyre of fragrant sandalwood, wrapped his body in layers of clean cloth and placed it with care. 8 royal families sent emissaries to claim relics, and a solemn agreement was reached. The remains would be divided equally, enshrined in stupas across the land. But the true relic was not ash. It was the teaching, the 4 noble truths, the eightfold path, the silence behind the breath, the calm behind the storm, the truth that lives on not in memory, but in practice. In time, monks and nuns would walk for weeks to reach that sal grove. Some would come in silence, others would chant, but all would feel something shift as they stepped beneath the trees. They would sit on the earth where the Buddha last rested and listen, not for sound, but for understanding. And sometimes, if the wind was just right, they would hear it. Strive with diligence. Ananda, as the years passed, returned often. He would sit beneath the very tree where he had knelt that night. He would run his hand along its bark, worn smooth now by the prayers of many. He would remember the final gaze, the final breath, and the words that lingered after everything else had passed away. All things that arise must pass, but the path is timeless. And in the stillness there would be no fear, only peace. And so that is how he left, not in triumph, not in spectacle, but in peace, wrapped in stillness, under trees that bloomed out of season, as if even nature bowed to the one who no longer clung. And in that final moment, the world did not end. It simply continued, quieter, wiser, and forever changed. It is said that if you gaze long enough at the full moon, you may see not a face, but a shape, a small, still shape, hunched and silent, a hare, curled in the center of silver light. In forests and villages, monks and children alike have told the story of how that hare came to be there. not for magic, but for meaning. Because once, long ago, when the Buddha lived a life not as a king, not as a sage, but as a simple forest hare, he offered something no other could. The forest in those days was peaceful. The trees were tall and generous, the rivers clear, the days warm, and the nights cool like silk. And in a soft clearing where sunlight filtered through leaves like golden rain, there lived 4 friends, a monkey, an otter, a jackal, and a hare. Each day they met beneath the same fig tree. They shared stories, laughed together, and vowed to live simply, offering kindness to all creatures. The hare, though smallest, was the quiet heart of the group. He spoke little but listened well. He never hoarded, never pushed. And his silence made room for the truth in others to unfold. One day, the hare turned to his friends as they sat in the cool shade. "Tomorrow is the holy day," he said softly. "The day of giving. If someone comes to us in need, we must give all we can." The others nodded eagerly. "I will gather fish from the river," said the otter. "I will collect ripe mangoes and figs," said the monkey. "I will steal curdled milk from the village shrine," said the jackal, grinning. The hare said nothing. "What about you?" they asked. He looked down. "I have no fruit, no claws to fish, no cleverness to steal. All I eat is grass." He looked up at the sky. "So, if someone comes in need, I will give them myself." The others fell silent. The wind stirred the fig leaves above them, and somewhere far off, as though moved by the weight of the hare's words, the world shifted. That night, as stars bloomed across the sky, the great deity Chakra, ruler of the heavens, heard of the hare's vow. He was curious. Among all the creatures, who would truly give without pride? Who would offer not for reward, but for love? So Chakra descended to earth, not in thunder or gold, but disguised as an old, starving hermit, his robe tattered, his hands trembling with hunger. At dawn, he approached the clearing. The 4 friends welcomed him with reverence. "I am hungry," he said. "I have not eaten in days." The otter offered his fresh fish. The monkey gave sweet mangoes. The jackal, grinning, placed stolen butter and curds at his feet. Then the hare stepped forward. "I have nothing," he said gently, "but I will not break my vow." He turned to his friends. "Build a fire." They looked at him in confusion. He nodded. "Yes, a fire." As the flames rose, the hare bowed before the hermit. "I offer you the only thing I have, my body." And with that, he leapt toward the fire. But the flames did not burn. They shimmered and vanished. And in their place stood Chakra, radiant in divine form, his eyes filled with both sorrow and awe. "O noble hare," he said, "you were willing to give your very life without hesitation, without desire for praise. In all the worlds, I have not seen a gift so pure." He reached down and gently lifted the hare. "I will not let you die. Instead, your story shall live beyond this forest, beyond this age." Chakra turned his gaze to the sky, and with a wave of his hand, he painted the hare's image on the moon. From that day on, when the full moon rises over rivers and rice fields, Over temples and rooftops and sleeping children, the hare watches from above. Not as a god, not as a legend, but as a reminder that the greatest gift is not gold, not grain, not clever words or rituals. It is the gift of selfless love. In time, the monkey, the otter, and even the jackal remembered the moment not with sorrow, but with wonder. They told it to their children. The forest grew quiet when the moon was full, and the fig tree always held a soft space beneath it, as if waiting. The story of the hare passed from mouth to mouth, country to country, century to century. And even now, if you ask an elder monk or a village storyteller why the moon glows so brightly, they may smile and say, "It's the light of a little forest hare." Still giving, still watching, still reminding us what it means to love completely. Because generosity is not measured in size, but in sincerity. And there is no gift greater than offering your whole self, freely, without fear. Not for recognition, but because it is right. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. There was once a dog who barked at everything. Leaves in the wind, a child's laughter, the moon. He lived near the edge of a monastery in the countryside. A dusty patch of land behind the kitchen, where scraps were tossed and shadows flickered on old stone walls. The monks called him Naga. No one knew where he came from. He was just always there, tail curled, eyes sharp, teeth ready, and always barking. When visitors arrived, he barked. When bells rang, he barked. Even when nothing moved at all, he barked, as if the world itself was suspicious. Some monks avoided him. "Too wild," they muttered. Others threw him bread or whispered mantras for his restless soul. But one monk, elderly, slow-moving, soft-spoken, began to sit near him each morning. No words, no food, just presence. He would settle into the grass, cross-legged, a few paces from Naga's resting place. He didn't reach for him, didn't scold the barking. He just sat. At first, Naga barked at him too, low growls, sharp yelps, but the monk remained still, breathing in, breathing out, no threat, no fear, no reaction. Days passed, then weeks. Naga still barked at others, still snarled at passing carts or fluttering robes, but not at the old monk. Eventually, when the monk arrived, Naga would simply lift his head and then rest it again. One morning, the monk placed a small bowl of water nearby. Naga didn't touch it, not for an hour, but as the sun climbed, he finally approached, drank, then sat beside the bowl. The monk said nothing, only smiled. A younger monk watching from the corridor asked later, "Master, how did you calm him? We've tried so many things, food, scolding, chants." The old monk replied, "He barked because the world barked back. He expected resistance, but when he found none, he started listening." Reactivity, the monk would later teach, is like a match near dry grass. One spark, and the fire spreads. But if the grass is damp, soft, grounded, the flame fizzles out. Naga still barked sometimes, but not with the same edge, not with the same fear. And when the old monk passed away years later, Naga lay beside his meditation cushion for 3 days, silent, not whimpering, not barking, just there. Monks and novices alike noticed. A dog who once barked at everything, now holding space for grief, with the stillness of a cloud. There is a saying, when you stop reacting, you start seeing. The dog had seen the one thing no command could teach, that peace isn't taught through force, but through presence that does not flinch. It is said that after his awakening under the Bodhi tree, the Buddha sat in silence, not because he had nothing to say, but because no words could contain what he saw. The world shimmered before him like a dew-covered web catching the morning light. Everything, every leaf, every breath, every thought was connected, not metaphorically, not poetically, but truly. And so, in that first silent gaze, the Avatamsaka Sutra was born, not as speech, but as vision, a vast radiant vision of interbeing. Imagine this: a net stretches across the cosmos, infinite in all directions. At each knot of the net, there is a jewel, and in each jewel, the entire net is reflected. Every other jewel, every other reflection. No part is separate. No jewel exists on its own. This is Indra's net, one of the core images in the Avatamsaka Sutra. It is not a fantasy. It is how reality is structured. Everything contains everything. You are a jewel in the net. So is the ant beneath your foot. So is the person you haven't forgiven. So is the star pulsing light from 10 billion years ago. Each one reflects all, and when one moves, all are changed. This is not romanticism. It is truth seen from beyond the ego. In the Avatamsaka, it is said that a single moment of insight can contain the entire Dharma, and a single grain of sand can reveal all Buddhas, because nothing is just itself. A drop of water is also the cloud, the river, the ocean, the drought, the cry of thirst, the hand that turns on the tap. All these are not separate events. They are expressions of one great dance. There's a story told from the sutra. The Bodhisattva Siddhartha travels in search of awakening. He visits 52 teachers. Each one shows him a different truth. A sailor, a child, a gardener, a courtesan, a beggar, a monk. Not one has the final answer, because in this vision there is no final answer. There is only deepening, broadening, the ever-widening ripple of understanding that you are not apart from anything, not even from the question. In the end, Siddhartha meets Samantabhadra, who tells him, the path is infinite, the practice is the vision is you. And in that moment, Siddhartha realizes he was never seeking something out there. He was walking through his own reflection. If you truly see this just once, you can never hate again in the same way. Because to harm another is to harm yourself. To lift another is to lift all. You do not have to understand the whole net. You only have to touch one jewel, a single act of kindness, a single moment of stillness, a single breath where you choose love over fear. That one act changes everything, because the net responds, because you are not alone, because no wave rises by itself. Commentary. The Avatamsaka Sutra is sometimes called the flower ornament scripture, because it reveals the beauty of reality as it is. Not flat, not linear, but multi-dimensional, like a lotus unfolding endlessly in every direction. In our daily lives, we feel separate. I am here, you are there. This is mine, that is yours. But this is illusion. A necessary illusion perhaps, but illusion nonetheless. Reality is interpenetration. You are in me, I am in you. Even now, reading these words, your breath carries the oxygen once exhaled by trees that died 1,000 years ago. Your thoughts are shaped by your grandmother's voice, by books written by strangers, by the laughter of a friend you no longer speak to. Even your loneliness is shared, because someone else right now feels it too. This is not meant to overwhelm you. It is meant to free you, because when you understand interconnection, you do not have to do everything. You only have to do something and trust that it matters. Because it does. Because the net responds. A Zen teacher once said, "When a bird sings on one branch, the whole forest awakens." You may be that bird. You may be the branch, or the silence that follows. Each one is essential. Each one reflects the whole. You are not small. You are a jewel in the net, reflecting everything, and being reflected by everything. So polish your jewel, not for glory, but for others, because the clearer you become, the clearer the whole web shines. The sun rose slowly over the wide green fields, brushing the tops of the grass with gold. Mist drifted over the earth like breath from a dreaming world. And in a quiet corner of the meadow, where the stalks grew thick and the wind passed gently, lived a flock of quail. They were small birds, light-boned and quick, their feathers dappled like earth and sunlight. They lived simply, eating seeds, singing softly, and moving together like a single thought. And among them was one who saw more than the others, who watched not only the sky and the grass, but the patterns within them. He was the Buddha in a past life, and though he had no title or special perch, the others came to trust him, because he noticed what they missed, and he saw what was coming. Each day, the flock flew out into the fields to feed. Each day they returned, wings beating as one, hearts light. But one morning, as the sun rose pale behind thin clouds, the wise quail called the others close. "There is danger coming," he said. The flock stilled. "A fowler is near. He lays traps in the tall grass. If we are not careful, we will be taken." Some of the younger birds flapped their wings in alarm. "Should we stop flying?" asked one. "No," said the wise quail, "but we must act together." He showed them a plan. "If one is caught in the net," he said, "do not panic. Each of us must place our beaks beneath the net. At the same moment, we will lift and fly." "To freedom?" a small chick asked. He nodded. "Yes, together." The flock agreed, and the very next day, the net came. It was hidden beneath the dew-wet grass. A few birds landed without seeing it. With a sudden pull, the fowler sprang the trap. Wings fluttered, cries rang out. But the wise quail shouted, "Now!" as we practiced. The others rushed in, beaks down, wings strong. And together they rose, the net lifted with them, light as silk on the wind. And just beyond the trees, they dropped it, free once more. The fowler, watching from behind a tree, blinked. "Strange," he muttered. "I've never seen birds do that." He returned the next day, and again the next. Each time the net was lifted. Each time the birds escaped. He grew frustrated. "Clever little things," he muttered. "But they won't always be united." And he was right, because fear does not break the flock, but ego can. One morning, 2 young quail quarreled. "You always land too close," snapped one. "You always peck too fast," the other retorted. Their voices rose. The others turned away, uncomfortable. The wise quail approached them gently. "Remember," he said, "the net does not care who is right, only who is divided." But pride had taken root. The quarrel continued. And the next day, when the net fell again, something changed. The 2 angry quail were caught. The others flew in, ready to help. "Lift with us," they called. But the 2 snapped at each other. "You grab that side!" "No, you're too slow." Their beaks tangled, their wings struck each other, and in the confusion, the net stayed down. The fowler emerged from the trees, and that day, not all escaped. The survivors gathered in silence beneath a low fig tree. Even the wind was still. The wise quail spoke, not in anger, but with sorrow. "Together we can lift what traps us, but alone, even a feather becomes too heavy." In time, the flock mended. The young quail apologized, and the net, though dangerous, was never as strong as their unity. The fowler eventually gave up and moved on, and the wise quail remained, never seeking attention, never blaming, but always watching, always reminding them it is not the trap that captures us. It is forgetting that we are stronger together. In quiet monasteries, monks would later chant this story beneath swaying trees. They would bow not to the birds, but to the truth they carried. That unity is not just comfort, it is survival. Because in this world, nets will fall. But if we move with one breath, with one purpose, with one heart, even the strongest snare cannot hold us. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. The midday sun beat down on the monastery grounds, turning the stone paths warm beneath bare feet. A hush lingered under the mango trees, broken only by the soft sweep of a broom or the distant cry of a myna bird. Somewhere in the distance, a pot clinked gently on a wash stone. It was the kind of afternoon that invited stillness. Under the spreading shade of a sala tree, the Buddha sat. His robes were folded neatly, his spine straight yet effortless. His gaze lowered, not in sleep or withdrawal, but in alert peace, like the surface of a quiet pond. From the southern walkway came Malunka, a young monk with a troubled brow. He had once been praised for his intellect, admired for the sharpness of his reasoning. But in recent months, that sharpness had turned inward. Each meditation left him with more questions than silence. He dreamed of stars, of time looping backward, of endless rebirths and impossible beginnings. He had filled scrolls with inquiries. He debated with scholars until his throat ached. But peace never came. And so today, he came to the Buddha. He bowed low. "Blessed One," he said, "I have questions." The Buddha did not speak immediately, but his silence was not dismissive. It was a space, an invitation. Malunka hesitated, then stepped forward. "Is the universe eternal?" he asked. "Is it infinite? Will a Buddha exist after death or vanish like smoke? Is the soul bound or free? Is the world self-created or born of design?" Each question emerged like a stone cast into a well, sharp, fast, echoing. The Buddha remained quiet. Malunka's face tightened. "Why will you not answer me?" he asked. "Are these not worthy questions? Are we not seekers of truth?" The Buddha looked up. His gaze was soft but steady. The other monks nearby paused in their work and drew closer, sensing the moment. The Buddha spoke. "Let me tell you a story. There was once a man," he said, "who was struck by a poisoned arrow in battle. The wound was deep. The poison spread quickly. His friends and family rushed to bring a healer. But the man, gasping, objected. "Before I allow treatment," he said, "I must know who shot me. Was he a nobleman or a laborer? What was his clan? Where was he born? What kind of bow did he use? Long or short? What wood was it carved from? What was the arrow's length? The feathers? Were they peacock or eagle? What poison did he use, and who taught him?" The monks chuckled, some hiding smiles behind folded hands. But the Buddha's gaze didn't waver. While the man demanded these answers, he died. He turned fully toward Malunka. "Would you call that man wise?" Malunka lowered his head, chastened. "No, blessed one." The Buddha continued, his voice like slow water. "We are each struck by the arrow of suffering, pain, aging, death. The urgent question is not what lies beyond the river, but how to stop the bleeding, how to live with clarity now. We must remove the arrow before the poison spreads too far." Malunka stood in stillness. The breeze lifted the hem of his robe. His hands, once clenched, softened at his sides. "But don't those other questions matter?" he asked. "Aren't they part of the path?" "They may," the Buddha said, "but only after the wound is tended. Theories are branches, but we must first tend to the root. The Dharma is not meant to entertain the mind, it is meant to free it." The young monk exhaled. For years he had studied commentaries, argued with visiting teachers, sought certainty in logic and definition. But now he saw the arrow was still in him, and each speculative thought, each metaphysical obsession, had only twisted it deeper. That night, Malunka did not return to the library. He sat by the monastery's stone well and watched the moon ripple in the water. He did not write. He did not speak. He simply breathed, slowly, honestly. For the first time, he noticed the weight in his chest, not as a puzzle, but as pain. In the morning, he returned to the Buddha. He bowed deeply, forehead touching earth. "Blessed one," he said, "I no longer ask if the universe is eternal. I ask how to meet this moment without fear." The Buddha smiled. "That is the first step." And from that moment forward, Malunka's practice changed. He spoke less, listened more. When new monks asked abstract questions, he did not dismiss them. He simply asked, "Is this question healing you or delaying your healing?" Word of the exchange traveled. Soon, the story of the poisoned arrow spread. not as a rebuke of knowledge, but as a reminder of urgency. In a village struck by drought, a farmer mourned his ruined fields. His hands trembled with anger. "Why has fate cursed me?" he asked his neighbors. "Why was I born here and not in richer soil? Who sinned in a past life to bring this?" But then he remembered the story of the arrow. He sat beneath his withered tree and whispered, "How can I help my family now?" And the answer came quietly, "Begin digging a well." In a riverside town, a mother wept for her daughter, taken by fever. She begged the heavens for a sign, wondered what sins she had committed, questioned every past decision. But the village priest, who had once trained as a monk, told her the story. That night, she held her daughter's shawl and lit a lamp in silence, not to understand fate, but to honor love. Elsewhere, a scholar stood before a crowd, reciting theories about the soul's origin and whether consciousness survives death. In the back row, a quiet boy raised his hand. "Sir," he asked, "have you removed your arrow yet?" The crowd fell still. The scholar did not answer. He returned to his room that night and sat without books for the first time in years. The Buddha never forbade questions. He welcomed inquiry. But he offered a compass, not a cage. He simply asked, "Will this question free you? Or bind you? Will it heal your wound? Or distract you from the blade still buried?" That became the measure. And so the monks learned not just what to ask, but when to ask and why, because the arrow is real. The pain is now. The wound is not a theory, and the first task, before philosophy, before argument, before metaphysics, is to pull it out, not later, not after you name the wood, not once you've traced its lineage, but now. A small boat drifted across the open sea. The waves rocked it gently. Clouds moved slowly above. Seabirds called from afar, but there was no land in sight. In the boat sat a lone traveller, bowl in lap, robes soft with salt air. He watched the sky reflect on the water and whispered the phrase he'd heard 100 times but never understood. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. These words come from the Heart Sutra, one of the most revered texts in Mahayana Buddhism. They are short, sharp, mysterious. They have been chanted in temples for centuries, painted on scrolls, whispered by monks, recited by dying lips. But what do they mean? How can something be both form and emptiness? Is it a riddle, a paradox, or a doorway? The traveller had once believed emptiness meant nothingness, that it was cold, silent, void. He tried to detach, to erase, to disappear. But the more he tried, the heavier he felt, because he still existed, still felt grief, still saw suffering in others and in himself. So he came to the ocean, not to escape, but to sit inside the question. The waves rose, fell. He dipped his fingers in the water. It clung for a moment, then slipped away. Form, emptiness, a wave, is not separate from the sea. It rises, appears, shines in the light, then dissolves. But it was never apart. It never existed in the way we imagine. It was always just movement, a form born from formlessness, a shape that could never be held. This is the meaning of emptiness. shunyata in Sanskrit. It does not mean nothing. It means no fixed, independent existence, no solid boundary between self and world. Everything is interbeing, dependent, arising together. Your body is form, but where does it begin? At the skin. What about the breath entering your lungs? What about the warmth from the sun on your cheek? What about the smile passed to you by a stranger? Where do you end and the world begin? The more you look, the more it all dissolves into ocean. Form is emptiness. Everything you see is temporary, transient, unstable. But then, the second line, emptiness is form. This is the beauty. Emptiness is not barren. It appears as everything. The flower, the teacup, the child's laugh, the pain in your chest. All are expressions of emptiness, not meaningless, but miraculous, because they are here. Briefly, shining like dew before it falls. The traveller looked around the boat. Wood planks, salt crust, a loose nail near the bow, all temporary, all destined to decay. And yet, each part of the boat held him above the water. Emptiness had taken form, and that form mattered. It kept him afloat. There is a story from a monastery. A student asked the master, "If all is emptiness, why do we sweep the floor?" The master said, "Because the dust is also empty." Then handed him the broom. Emptiness does not deny suffering. It does not say your pain is an illusion. It says this pain is real, but not permanent. It arises and passes, like a wave, like a thought, like every tear that ever fell. Emptiness does not diminish life. It makes life possible. When you understand this, not just with mind, but with breath, you begin to live differently. You don't grasp as tightly. You don't fear change quite so much. You begin to see others not as objects, but as fleeting, radiant moments, not mine, not enemy, just waves, each one precious. The traveller reached into the ocean and lifted a handful of water. It shimmered, slipped through his fingers, gone. But the sea remained, and he smiled. Commentary. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. It is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be felt, to be returned to again and again, like a bell that rings across the years. Each time you hear it, you understand a little more. You are not a solid thing. You are movement, memory, dust and starlight. You are shaped by your parents, your fears, your laughter, your kindness. You are not fixed, but you are real, not because you are permanent, but because you are here. Now, the boat on the ocean is your life. It will not last, but while it floats, it can carry you. It can carry others. It can move with the waves, not fight them. And when it sinks, because all boats do, the sea will still be there. And you will return to it, not lost, but home. Every morning at 6:15 she opened the curtains. The light crept in slowly, soft and golden, and the photo on the mantel caught it just right. It was old, sepia-toned, edges curled like leaves in autumn. A man in uniform, smiling, handsome, still young. Her husband, gone now for 17 years. Miriam never moved the photo. It stayed on the same spot. Third tile from the right, 2 inches from the lamp. She didn't talk to it, didn't cry over it. She simply saw it. Every day, grief for her had stopped being a storm. It had become weather, something you dress for, something you feel without needing to fight. Once, her granddaughter asked, "Why don't you get rid of that old photo? You have better ones on your phone." Miriam just smiled. That one isn't for looking. It's for remembering. Her husband had died in his sleep. No warnings, no pain, just silence. She found him in the morning, hands still curled as if holding a dream. She didn't scream, didn't collapse. She sat beside him, held his hand and whispered, "Thank you." People told her to be strong. She didn't try. She simply continued. At the temple nearby, the monks would speak of impermanence, of how everything changes, how attachment creates suffering. Miriam understood this. Not as an idea, but as a reality. She loved her husband deeply, but she did not clutch him. Even in his absence, she let him be gone. And in doing so, he never truly left. There's a Zen teaching. To hold a butterfly, you must open your palm. Miriam didn't keep a shrine, didn't tell his story over and over. She just lived in a way that would make him proud. She tended the garden they once planted together. She drank the coffee he used to brew. She folded his shirts one last time and gave them away. Not because she stopped loving him, but because she didn't want her love to become a cage. One day, a neighbor lost her husband. She came to Miriam, eyes red, voice shaking. "I don't know how to live without him." Miriam poured tea, sat with her, said nothing at first, then quietly offered, "You don't live without him. You live with the part of him that still breathes in you." The neighbor sobbed. And Miriam did not stop her. She just placed a hand on hers and let it be. Love doesn't end. It changes shape. And grief, too, is a form of love. One that knows how to bow. Miriam is older now, hands soft with age. Memories flickering at the edges, but she still opens the curtains each morning. Still lets the light find the photo, not to bring him back, but to let him go again, gently, lovingly, without holding. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.